Good morning, guys, and welcome out to Revolution. We are going to continue looking at the debate between Dan Haifley and Mark Ward. And so we've done part one, which basically consisted of examining what Dan Haifley had to say. And I think it's a general consensus by looking at comments in threads and on Facebook blogs and things like that, that Dan could have done a bit better, and that his expertise is in other fields. I think I've sort of come to Dan's defense a little bit in a sense where I think the whole topic is subjective. It's subjective because if you know algebra, someone who doesn't know algebra, what do you say to them? But get with the program, study, think about these things. So someone who's grown up on the King James Bible, it's no issue to them. Their kids know it. They preach from it. And yes, they might have to look up a word here and there, but it's not really an issue to them. And so that's why a lot of people who have grown up on the King James, to them, this is just simply not even an issue. And I can understand that fully. And I think that's where Dan comes from. His whole life has read the King James. And, in my listening to people like the Dean Burgon Society, people like Phil Stringer, D.A. Waite, a lot of these guys, they've read the King James for so long and so often that it's just part of their life. And that's where they want everyone to come to. The other side of the coin is a 400-year-old book is going to have old words. And so one of the things is with what Mark Ward's arguing, it's not like a profound thing. He's just arguing and saying there's old words. And you can't really even argue against that. It's like, yeah, there's old words there. And so I think the whole topic is kind of subjective. Now, there are old words that people need to look up. And now, if you struggle with all that, I mean, long before Mark Ward came along, I'd done the 2016 edition. And if you go to the Textus Receptus Bibles web page, you can compare that with the King James and with other Reformation Bibles. Now, a lot of people wanted me to print that. And so that came out in 2023, King James Version 2023 edition, where I've gone through and updated archaic terms, archaic words, where there's archaic syntax, grammar, things like that, where it's updated. But Mark Ward won't even think about that one. He just wants to push the New King James because the companies that he works for, like Faith Life, obviously, they have Logos Bible software, a huge, you can take out a $10,000 small little loan and get their package. But Logos, they also run Verbum, which is the Catholic side of it. So they're making money from the Catholics and telling the Catholics to read the literature of the Pope and, Mother Teresa's story and, how to wear the brown scapula properly and, all the other, horrible, deceptive, idolatrous doctrines of Rome. But, Mark was working for them, but, thankfully he moved on from that job because he wants to, improve himself. And so he's gone with Crossway. So Crossway, I don't know if it's that much better in a sense where if you're looking at companies that have runs on the board for being orthodox, I mean, if you just go to Crossway website straight away, they're selling Catholic editions of the ESV and stuff like this. And it just makes you wonder, like Mark seems to just be, a young guy concerned with the readability of the King James, where most people who are on the Textus Receptus King James side see it as a conflict of interest that he's trying to push modern versions, but then all of a sudden get involved with this issue, where if he was really that interested in truth and really that interested in getting his views across, I don't think that, working for Faith Life or working for Crossway, it's sort of like working for an oil company, and you sort of, against the environment movement. I know most of us would probably, we don't see any problem with oil. I don't, but you know what I mean? There's a conflict of interest there. And so I think that needs to be pointed out. And a lot of people don't realize that, Mark. They just think, oh, he's just a concerned guy. He's just like an academic type of person. No, he's a salesman for the Bible industrial complex, which is $1 billion industry. Okay, so that's got to be remembered. There's a lot of money in Bible versions. There is so much money in Bible versions. Groups like Thomas Nelson, Zondervan, these groups are making so much money. And so, of course, Logos, they want us to get every version. They want you to think that you need to go and buy 15 versions for your studies. And, your bookshelf needs just to be wall to wall with a whole bunch of translations. That's because they're making a cut off every Bible, and they just want to sell it to you. Thomas Nelson, they were involved with the 1901 American Standard Version. But they were also instrumental in popularizing Benny Hinn's book, Good Morning, Holy Spirit. So they don't really have a conscience, these book publishing companies. That is owned by News Corporation, basically. And so when you look at some of these companies, that they're just looking for the bottom line. They're not really interested in truth. And so I think, I don't think there's anything wrong with working for a group that promotes the Bible. But I think it is a conflict of interest if you're going to come onto this stage and say, hey, I'm just concerned about my King James brethren and all this stuff. No, let's just be honest here. You are trying to promote modern versions, and the King James stands in the way of that. And King James onlyists, as they're being labeled, are the ones who are pointing out all the problems in these modern Bibles. And so Mark feels like he has to make a stand against that. And really what he's doing with a debate like this is he's just stating the obvious. It's like getting Shakespeare and going, do you understand every word of Shakespeare? I bet you don't understand what cull means, C-U-L. See, you don't know what it means. And you think you can read Shakespeare? No, you can't. Get rid of it. It's like, well, of course, it's a 400-year-old book. But the other side of the coin is Mark is promoting the New King James and saying it's almost pretty much without error. It's just a faithful TR edition. He won't deal with the example that I've constantly brought up of 1 John chapter 3, verse 16, where it omits of God there, where it's in Beezer, it's in the 1611 without italics, it's in Scrivener, and it's omitted in the New King James without a footnote at all. And it actually destroys the deity of Christ, because it says, hereby know we the love of God, because he, and the closest antecedent in there is God, he laid down his life for us. Who did? God laid down his life for us. But Jesus did. Jesus is God. So that verse there just shows that the New King James doesn't follow the Textus Receptus in every place. Now, that's only just one place where I'm like, okay, well, let's just focus on that. Because you start focusing on 15 other things and everyone gets all caught up in all that. It's like, well, explain that. So Mark doesn't seem to want to admit that there are errors that cause Textus Receptus and King James people to go, we're not going to read that. We understand the New King James, yes, it's readable, but there are places in the New King James that we are not happy with, translational choices, and not one of the translators was a Textus Receptus advocate, not one of them. I think there was 130 translators who worked on it, and 0 of them thought that the Textus Receptus was akin to the original, and 0 of them thought that the King James Version was an accurate translation. And so then they're doing a translation for people who have the TR. It's like, it just seems disingenuous. But at the end of the day, we're going to be going through Mark's opening statements. And I just sort of feel that, like, as I've said from the beginning, I don't necessarily agree with everything Dan said, but I definitely don't agree with everything Mark said. But at the end of the day, all Mark's doing is saying this is an old word. Now, the whole concept of false friends is something that he has, coined in a sense where he's borrowed that from linguistics, and he's using that term to talk about words that you didn't know were archaic and obsolete and had, or they've got a secondary meaning. Like you might have words that are homophones, or you might have a word like live and live. It's usually the context you have to figure out, they're spelt the same, which one is which. And so there are some words like that in the King James. That probably the best example is the word gay. That's changed, especially in this generation. And so, 20, 30 years ago, we used to buy ice creams that were called gay times. They still sell them here, but they're that's changed now. If you're going to have a gay time, it's very different to this generation. And so there are words that drop out of usage and things like that. But King James people, TR people know about this. It's not a mystery. If you talk to anyone in the Textus Receptus, King James only groups, they will tell you, like D.A. Waite with the defined King James Bible. If you go to the Trinitarian Bible Society, they've got lists that they've had since the 90s, and oftentimes these lists have been around for a long time. They've actually usurped older lists. And so the thing is, when you go through those lists, well, a lot of Mark's words are in there. But I just think there are words that Mark thinks are false friends when they're actually not. And so I was sort of talking about mansion in my previous video. Now, I know some people might have just thought, well, Nick doesn't really understand Mark's point of view on mansion. No, I do understand it. I've gone through his material with a fine-tooth comb. My issue is he is not understanding what a mansion is today. And so a mansion today is something that is a cut above everything else. And so, of course, in my father's house are many mansions, meaning in my father's house are many places of dwelling. And that's in the Father's house. So it's going to be a million times better than what we have here. So it's going to be a mansion. It just makes perfect sense in today's context. And knowing and understanding the usage of the word mansion, that'd probably be an interesting thing to just do a whole video on, of some of these false friends that I'm completely against. The issue of study, like I mentioned in my last video, I'm sort of almost exhausted just in every video, just going through and saying, well, spedauzo, what's the meaning of spedauzo? How is it used? And then just reading the context of the verse. And it's like, well, there you go. How can you not see this, And so, but apparently Dan, I sort of heard him say something about study. We agree with study or something like that. And so I was like, oh, okay. But I'm pretty sure at the end he mentioned something about study. So we're going to go through this. I think what I'll do, I'll just start the video up. Now, what I've noticed is with my videos, I tend to get caught up in a lot of the comments, and I have been reading through them. Now, it's sort of a bad habit of mine. So what I'll do, I'll actually just put the comments up on the screen. Now, if there's something that triggers a thought, or it's a really good point, I'll elaborate on that. But I won't just go through and read everything, because I remember there was one video I was doing and I had like 20 people watching, and I started reading the comments and I looked over and it was down to 0. Everyone just got bored with it. And so I was like, oh, I don't think even the people in the chat want me to read this out. So, yeah. So anyway, let's start this video. I'll just make sure the sound is on. Okay. Here we go.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dan. And Jim, thank you so much for hosting us here. I'm honored by your presence tonight, everyone who's come and those who are joining us for the live stream on my channel and others. I am grateful for your time and attention. I'm grateful especially to Dan for perceptive questions in good conversations that we've had previously. And I'm grateful to God for this opportunity to speak what I pray will be truth. I want my words to obey the double love command, to love the Lord and to love you, my neighbor. For the cause of truth and love, I must clearly say, I do not believe that the King James...
For the cause of truth and love, surely, working for Faith Life for all these years, and, I think it's Lexham Press that are going to put out his book. Would you think there's a bit of a conflict of interest there? Like a Bible publishing company, promoting Logos and, even if it was Crossway, is there a bit of a conflict of interest there? I think there is. And I think that Mark, it's not just love, because if it was love, he would be reaching out to people like me. He would be reaching out to lots of other people, but he's blocking people left, right, and center. I mean, he's blocking more people than Stephen Anderson is at the moment. And it's quite ridiculous. Like some of these people like Christopher Yetzer, he's a really nice guy and he's an intellectual, and he just goes through things in a very detailed way. But Mark's like, I'm not getting through to that guy, and just he'll block him from his YouTube. And there's just sort of no way that Chris can contact Mark. And he's like, well, is he actually reading what I'm saying anymore? And Mark's just like, no, you don't exist anymore. But he says that he's an apostle to the King James onlyist. So wouldn't you think, like, imagine David Wilkinson, he was like, I'm called to go to New York, I'm going to preach to the gangs and all that. And he went there. Imagine him like, no, I'm not going to talk to those horrible Nicky Cruz-like characters. I'm only going to go for the ones who have respect for me. It's like, but when people actually do have respect, like Bryan Ross and Yetzer and these other guys, they're still just thrown under the bus. And so I just don't think Mark Ward is being genuine here when he's saying it's all about my love for my brethren and all this sort of stuff. I think it's just rhetoric. I just don't see it. When I've watched all of his videos, I've critiqued probably half of them, and I just don't see it. I see Mark Ward as being passive aggressive. He doesn't just come out and say, hey, you bunch of lowbrow morons. He comes out and says, well, these people are quite, toxic in their ways, but I'm trying to, reach out to them. And I met this one person the other day who listens to me and actually reads my material. And it's like, look, we're all listening to you, Mark. You've got the platform. We're all listening to you. We just don't agree with you. And we are poking holes in your argument. And we just don't think that you are being genuine. And when we talk about, yes, the readability of the King James, that's one issue. But we couple that with the whole issue of text, because we put up with the archaic words because the last major update of a King James was Westcott and Hort, and they snuck in a never seen before Greek text that has all these updates until today, with 2,900 less Greek words, with 8,000 changes, let alone all the English words that they changed in their version. We think that was a corruption. We see that as a downgrade. We see that as a perversion of the scriptures. People who are Unitarians, George Van Smith worked on the text. He was like a Jehovah's Witness. He was there with Westcott and Hort, sitting there with them. He wrote a book about how the doctrines are changed. And so this just doesn't get dealt with. It gets slightly mentioned when it gets to saturation point, when we're basically got the megaphone out and we're saying, what about this? What about this? What about this? Like that, that meme, the guy with a trumpet, following his sister around and just blowing it in her ear. And it's like, we have to do that to get Mark Ward's attention. But they usually just sort of brush it away. And when they were doing the Textual Confidence Collective, they said, well, Scrivener sat next to him. like as if that muddies the TR somehow. And it's like, they're not dealing with these issues. What about Carlo Martini? What about liberals in the academy? What about Metzger? What about the influence of Bart Ehrman still in the academy? The massive influence that he has in those circles. Eugene Nida. What about these type of people working with the Jesuits? And I'm not saying this is a big Jesuit alien Area 51 conspiracy. It's on Wikipedia, dude. Just Carlo Martini was in line to be a pope at some stage, and he worked on the Nestle alarm text. George Van Smith did as well. And so Mark wants to push that text. This is his agenda. But he's like, no, I only want to deal with readability. And so, which is, as I said, it's sort of subjective. Some people can read the King James perfectly. Some people can read Hebrew perfectly. And by the way, I'm going to be interviewing Nehemiah Gordon this week. So he contacted me and said, when do you want to do it? I'm over COVID. Let's do it. So we're going to do it probably on Thursday about 3 o'clock New York time in the afternoon. So that'll be great. But he knows Hebrew. I don't. And so, but if someone said, oh, Hebrew is a really hard language to learn, he would go, no, it's not. I've known it since I was a youth. The same as the King James. People who frequently read it, I have no problems with it because I'm studying it. I'm thinking about it all the time. It's my main text. I don't even read my own text because I don't have a problem with the King James. This is for people who, like, say, here is the King James New Pella Testament. I've given these to people in Papua New Guinea, and they're like, we want an English Bible. When I give them the King James, they don't want to read it. It's too hard for them. But when they are given like a New King James, they're like, oh, that's readable. But I know the New King James has problems. And so that's why I've worked on this text for people who basically they want a King James, something more accurate than the New King James. And so anyway, it's exactly what Mark Ward's saying that he wants to create. But on one side, he's saying, well, the New King James is a good Bible, but then he wants to create a new one. And it's like, well, why would you want to create a new one when there's already one there, apparently, that's really good? Wouldn't you just educate people on how good it is? But he's like, no, let's work on a text together, sort of thing. At the end of this debate, he said that. So anyway, let's continue.
James Version is sufficiently intelligible to contemporary English readers, not for the things that we need the King James to do, not for preaching, for daily reading, for intense study, for memorization, for evangelism on the plain and in the neighborhood, for children's ministry, for hymnody, even for country songs. Now, the King James is not entirely unintelligible. I grew up understanding it pretty well, and I really want you to hear me carefully place my position between extremes. I'm not saying it's totally unintelligible. The King James taught me the gospel, as Dan mentioned. And it hit.
Well, one of the things is, now I know I'm not really talking about what he's saying yet because he's just introducing what he's saying. But the whole thing about saying that the King James Version, if you give that to your children, it's a sin. Now, wasn't it only a few years ago that in the book Why I Preach from the Received Text, that was by Jeff Riddle and Christian McShaffery. Now, wasn't it one of the main issues that they brought up was one of the authors said that they believed that the critical text was Satan's Bible. Okay, so I did a ton of videos about that because Matthew Everhard, he had come out around that time and said, well, I realize I'm not a critical text guy, I'm a majority text guy. But then he was like, how dare these people say Satan's Bible? This is just horrible. And so I was like, have you ever read Pickering's material? Pickering has this 4-page document, and he mentions like that the critical text is like of the devil. It's the work of Satan, like probably about 10 times in those 4 pages. And it's like, he's one of the gurus of the majority text. You've joined the majority text crew and said, this is the thing. They're like, you King James onlyists, you're a Stephen Andersonite, you're a Ruckmanite, you're a Ripplingerite. They chuck us all in the same box. But then they join a movement, and it's like, well, can't we say you're a Pickeringite, because he was one of the main guys behind the majority text. And so, but anyway, they were making a big fuss about Satan's Bible. But isn't Marx saying that the King James is Satan's Bible? Really? If you can't give that Bible to your kids, it must be Satan's Bible. He says it's a sin to do it. And in my theology, sin comes from Satan. I don't believe God created sin. There's no darkness in God. I don't believe God creates evil. I think evil, he creates calamity. That would be another word that we could look at. But at the end of the day, he's saying the King James is Satan's Bible. Really, that's what he's saying. So I will expect the Matthew Everhards and other people who got upset with the whole, Satan's Bible concept, they should be really upset with what Mark Ward has said here. So Alan Stewart says, since the apostate Ward is our apostle, shouldn't he be preaching the gospel to us in his presentation? Well, I guess he's sort of trying to get us to stop, the generational teaching of the King James to people. If you wind back the clock 50 years, everyone was reading the King James. 100 years ago, most, 99% of people were reading the King James. But what's amazing, if you just get a time machine and you go back 100 years, you're fine. But if you got some of those people and brought them forward 100 years, they're now in a cult. That's the thing. And so anyway, we'll just keep going through this. So Dwayne Green says, how many differences must there be from the TR in order for not to be considered a TR anymore? Well, I guess, see, one of the things is I've calculated that there are 20 differences between the text of Theodore Beza's 1598 and the King James text. So there are 20 places where the King James translators did their own textual criticism, and so it's pretty slight, 20 places out of the whole New Testament. So basically, they took their head off to Beza and said, "Look, you've nailed it, but there's just 20 places, and there are already things that are mentioned in his annotations." Okay, but I think that I can easily find 20 places where the New King James departs from the text that they say they're following. The Scrivener's 1881 text, it's usually called the 1894 text. I can find 20 of those. So someone like James White comes along and says, well, they actually back-translated, Scrivener back-translated from the King James. It's not even the Textus Receptus edition. It's from an English text and all this sort of stuff, and makes a big kerfuffle about it. So if I can find 20 departures from the Textus Receptus in the New King James, surely that applies as well. And it will have to be considered a completely different Textus Receptus, because James White's saying it's completely, this shouldn't even be considered, as sort of translated from the Textus Receptus, or in a sense where, Scrivener's used the Beza text as his main text, and then he's looked at the King James at those little places and amended them. But surely that same rule applies to the New King James, and we could create a Greek text underlying the New King James with all those errors in it. You know what I mean? And so we'll create a new TR that backs up the New King James. And so anyway, how many differences must there be for a TR in order for not to be considered a TR anymore? Well, I guess it just depends. The word TR covers many bases. When I say I follow the final form of the Textus Receptus, the text that underlies the King James Version, usually I'm talking about the 1598 plus about 20 adjustments that the King James translators worked on. So, but other people go, well, they're all TRs from the Complutensian Polyglot all the way through to the Elzevirs. They're all considered TR editions. So then you got people pitting TRs against each other, and it's just a label. It's a label that's retroactively put upon all the Greek texts of the Reformation. It's not really, something that was, basically up until the Elzevir's text, they were using things like this as a received text and things like that. But even the Bible talks about, the received text. But they were just simply using what they had. It was the only thing they had. They didn't have anything else. Vaticanus was completely rejected. And so when it comes to, which TR and all that Mark talks about, everyone I've interviewed on this channel, like we're talking about Phil Stringer and Will Kinney and a whole bunch of people, I've said, even Bible Protector, I interviewed him like years ago, and I'm like, where would you say the final edition of the TR is? And I read the quote of Edward Hills that the King James Version is its own type of TR, or specifically the underlying Greek text, and they're all in agreement. So that's what we're saying. But Mark just doesn't want to listen to that. He's just got an argument, and it's been answered. He just doesn't want to go with it. And I know some people have different answers. Like Doug Wilson says it's the 1550 TR. It's like, well, I don't know anyone who thinks that, but that's interesting. But let's just continue.
Its rich Elizabethan tones deep in my heart, where I treasure them to this day. I love the King James, no matter how hard it might be for some of my hearers to accept that. But the King James is a revision of the 1568 Bishop's Bible, which is a revision ultimately of the work of William Tyndale from the 1520s and 30s. Dan is right, 86% of the King James New Testament matches Tyndale, who did his work almost half a millennium ago, almost exactly, 500 years. 8 out of 10 historians agree that that is a long time. English has changed during that period. The very people who insist most ardently that modern English is dumbed down compared to the exalted English of the King James literally never use Elizabethan English in speech or writing, never. Instead of thinking of King James English on the vertical axis, seeing it as high and our English as low, I think that you and we need to think of King James English on the horizontal axis, the timeline. King James English is old. And because languages change slowly over time, all languages do this, and change subtly, King James English is more difficult to understand than contemporary English translations, and more difficult to understand than most King James readers know.
Well, see, one of the reasons why there hasn't really been an update is, well, when Westcott and Hort did what they did, they were just supposed to update the King James like what Blaney had done, or the Paris edition of 1762, or the Cambridge edition in 1638, and just to go through and just do some spelling updates and things like that, like maybe shoe SHEW to show and things like that. But they didn't just do that. They went through and snuck in this never seen before Greek text, and they had it based on this whole conspiracy theory of a Lucianic recension that was completely debunked, and no one believes it anymore. And the papyri totally wrote off the theories of Westcott and Hort. But they were like, well, we've actually already got our foot in the door here. Let's not let the facts get in the way of a good story. And so then they just started to go with the Nestle text, which was basically Westcott and Hort, the Weiss text, and the Weymouth text. And there was another one in there that was sort of in and out. But and basically the footnotes there were only just where they disagreed. The Tischendorf text as well was involved. And so, but then when you get to the era of Metzger and Carlo Martini, the Jesuit who was going to be a pope, and Kurt Aland and other liberals, they basically, when they were questioned about the methodology of what they did, they got the Westcott and Hort text and they added and subtracted according to what they saw fit from the Westcott and Hort text. So they went right back to that, which was formulated by Westcott and Hort, and a Unitarian was involved with it, like a Jehovah's Witness. So this is the thing. We look at what the Academy's been doing over the years, and we just don't trust them. we have zero trust for an update. And so this is one of the reasons there hasn't been one. Now, when I say there hasn't been one, there has been, like I've got the King James version, where is it? 2000. Oh, it's in a pile of books over there. Well, you can grab it, probably. The KJV 2000. Now, I bought tons of these when I was over in the Philippines back in like 2004 or something. And I was really excited. I was like, man, this looks like a really faithful update. And so I was going through it, but then there were just a few little bits here and there, and I was like, nah, that doesn't read properly. And then you got the New King James, you got the MEV, and so that's one of the main reasons why I've created the one that I have, because I've been excited about TR editions that come out that are, you know, the archaisms are just updated, because I think that that's a natural thing that should happen. If Westcott and Hort never existed, if they never did what they did, I think it just naturally would have been updated. Shoe would have been show, you know, believeth would have been believes, you know, things like that would have happened. But unfortunately, our trust has been robbed by these false teachers. What else can you call them? But the thing is, Mark thinks that Westcott and Hort are fantastic. He thinks, you know, Metzger and these other guys are great. And so what can you do with that? I just can't trust that these guys are going to give us a genuine update anytime soon. And so, but there have been quite a lot of, you know, attempts, usually by individuals, like the MEV. I mean, that was, I think I proved with Isaiah 58 verse 8 when it had reward, and it was REREWARD, reward, it looks like it's spelled, which means a rear guard. Like in military, it's like having a rear guard, but they actually put reward there. And that was their update. And it's like, I don't think they even went to the Hebrew. They said they used 47 translators. That's just a number because some people think there's 47 translators in the King James. There's probably about 60. And they've got 47 translators, and it's like they're only just updating the King James. That's all they did there in Isaiah 58 verse 8. I proved that probably only one guy made that mistake. So I don't think two guys would ever make that mistake. So it proves they never went to the Hebrew. They were just updating the English. And it just shows you that what they claim in their preface is not genuine. It's not true. And so we're tired of we can see through this. We're looking at the slop that they're serving us, and we're going, no. The New King James has come out, and we're like, no, sorry. I want all the words of God in there, but I also want them to be King James words in a sense where at least equivalent to what the King James has, not the righteousness of the saints in Acts 19 changed to the righteous acts of the saints. We don't want that. We want the righteousness of the saints, you know. And so anyway, so Ronnie G says, Alan Stewart, you and you guys in the Textus Receptus Academy are the most vitriolic and unrepentant slanderers. It's absolutely disgusting the way you guys go unchecked. Okay, so I'm the admin for the Textus Receptus Academy. I don't necessarily agree with everything that everyone says on that group, but it is an open forum. So Ronnie G, you're welcome to come on there, as long as you don't just shout at people and just go, you know, moron, you know, sort of thing. I block that. You know, I rarely block people, actually. I probably only block like maybe 10 people, and there's like 4,000 people on that. But usually it's when they just stop listening and they're just shouting. It's like, or say Doug Kudalik, he was on there for probably about 8 months. We allowed him to put all these articles. But when we were like, well, in your article, you're saying this and that, and he wouldn't even interact. He would just copy and paste something else. And it's like, are you even listening to me? Copy and paste something else. And so I sort of just got to the stage where we're like, sorry, Doug, you can't just copy and paste. You've got to interact a little bit. And so it got to the stage where he just wouldn't interact, and he was just saying, you guys are all in a cult. And it's like, well, so we got a bit tired of him. But we are pretty long-suffering, you know what I mean? Like Mark's in the group. He's got me blocked personally, but he's allowed to post there. So, yeah, you know, jump in, teach us where we're going wrong, you know. I just have that group so that we have a platform where people can discuss these things. Some people jump on there and they're King James only guys, and they get corrected by other people, like TR people. Some people are TR people and they get corrected by other people, and we've got critical text guys on there. So if someone's being toxic on there, it's, some posts I've missed. I've been away for 3 weeks, so there might be a bunch of stuff on there I haven't really seen or read through every thread. But it's just basically a place where we can get together. And I think the whole concept of, they're toxic. And I mean, I jump on, young earth creationist groups, and there are atheists on there who are just saying the most vilest things. And it's like, well, it's sort of everywhere. You know what I mean? But I'm not saying that, I endorse that, or I say it's good or whatever. And I do know some people just, all they do is just say bad stuff about the person, where I would rather interact with the argumentation. And so that's like the whole thing with Mark. Nearly one of the main arguments is people go, well, he's effeminate, where they know that the word effeminate has two meanings, has a modern reading meaning, and it also has a meaning in the King James. And so they're actually calling him this. And I think that Mark actually sort of wants this to happen so that he can claim victimhood. It's like, well, they're calling me names. Well, what's interesting is the critical text guys were calling me effeminate back when I was bringing out my Easter articles when I was younger. And I would be reading through my Easter articles, and they're like, oh, too much estrogen. This guy's effeminate. And the critical text guys were doing this. I mean, if you've ever read the Bible blog on, I think it's Tapper Talk or something like that, it's a forum, just go on there. They are so toxic. But they're, if you want to jump in and do studies, there's a whole bunch of information there. So, yeah, wherever there is a controversy, you're going to get a lot of heat. So, so Ronnie G, I just sort of throw that out there. Yeah, you and you guys, really, another person throwing labels on us. So let's let Mark continue.
Yes, contemporary translations of the Bible into English contain difficult words like mandrakes and propitiation, but they don't, by and large, contain old words, words that we no longer use in common speech.
Okay, so let's go to soup. Okay. Let's go to Numbers 21:14. And let's look at this issue of readability, because Mark's oftentimes, talking about readability, etc. Let's just go to the parallel Bibles. Now, the King James Bible says, wherefore it is said in the book of the wars of the Lord, what he did in the Red Sea and in the brooks of Arnon. Now, the New King James says, instead of what he did in the Red Sea, it has Waheb in Super. So if I did what Mark Ward's doing, if I just stood before people and said, how many people read the New King James here? And hands go up. I'll go, okay, so what is Wahab in Super? I don't know. Maybe I could make a phone poll, do you read the New King James? Okay, so what is Wahab in Super? They're like, oh, I don't know. And, it's in the King James, but the Berean Standard Bible has Wahab in Super. English Standard Version has Wahab in Super. Here we have Wahab in the area of Super. It says Zahab in Super in the NIV. The NASB has Wahab in Super. The Legacy Standard Bible has Wahab in Super. So, do you guys know what Wahab in Super means? So this is just one place that I'm just showing where it's like, look, the Aramaic Bible says the flame of the whirlwind and in the river of Arnon. It's like, okay. Fire Zub. Wahab, with its creeks in the territory of Super. So this is the type of thing that seems to be happening with a lot of places especially in the Old Testament. The Old Testament in the New King James is really bad. And believe me, I've read the New King James many times, multiple times, and you go through the Proverbs, and sometimes it's saying the exact opposite thing. So you're reading through it, and you're thinking, okay, it's going to say that that's a bad thing, but it makes out like it's a tasty trifle or something. It's like, I don't know, what is that? A custard dish with strawberries in it? It's traditional wounds or something. It's so strange. But here we have Vahab in super. It's in nearly every version. So what do we do with that? Like Webster's has what he did in the Red Sea. All the rest have Wahab and super. So when we're talking about readability, what about that? Why isn't that brought up? Why isn't Mark saying yes? And some of these modern Bibles are making things harder. Because it just goes against his narrative. And this is the thing, he just doesn't bring up these issues where we go, well, okay, you brought up, these other issues, readability, etc. Let's go and look up some words. And all you have to do is type in archaic words in the NIV. I think it's an article by Vance. Where is it? Lawrence M. Vance. Okay, so he has, NIV has acclamation instead of voice, aghast instead of amazed, an alcove instead of a little chamber, annotations instead of a story. So it just goes through and just says some of these words are difficult. They're hard. You have to look them up, Now, I understand the purpose of updating words. Sometimes words have completely gone out of our dictionaries and everything. They're just completely obsolete. In a sense, where you get the older dictionaries, of course, they're going to be there, but in the modern dictionaries. And so, sometimes you do have to replace something with a word that's not that easy, But and that's sometimes that's been the conundrum that I've found. You get words like, or say with the New King James, you've got the old verily, verily. Okay, so we're very familiar with that. Verily, verily, I say unto thee. But the New King James changes it to most assuredly. Now, how many people have used most assuredly in their language? Zero. I don't know anyone, unless there's some poshy academic guy who's like, most assuredly, who says that? And they've got Jesus saying this often. So with the addition that I've done, because it's amen, amen, truly, truly seemed like the best way to go with that for an update, But yeah, we're looking at words that sometimes are harder in these, like a memorandum. It's a record, but also Nephilim. And doesn't that cause a whole bunch of problems? If you want to get into Michael Heiser stuff, get into the modern Bibles. If you want to get into the whole, council and all that stuff, Michael Heiser was really against the King James because it didn't bring out all the flavor of all that type of Book of Enoch nonsense. I'm not saying that the NIV is harder to read, okay? But what I'm saying is that Mark grabs a word and he'll say, oh, this is a hard word in the King James. I mean, we could do that with the NIV. We could do that with the ESV. I can do it with the New King James easily. So anyway, I just thought I'd bring that up. I'll put that into the chat. Anyone can look at that. A Scion of Zion, and you can look at some of these archaic words. Now, it's probably not the best way to word archaic words, because a lot of these words we do use, But I mean, bewilderment, blunted, blustering, breakers, brooches, brood, burnished, carnelian, citron, I got charioteers, or for horsemen. Charioteers, I guess it is. And so, yeah, anyway, I'll drop that down. But yeah, Wahab Wahhab in super. New King James is easier to read. Or Mark, what does Wahhab in super mean? You know, I'll give him a call. I'll read. Maybe I'll do the same survey that he did. I just want to show you this video here too. This guy, he got called up. So this is only a few days ago, 2 days ago. He got called up by Mike Ward, and he was at the other side of the phone conversation talking about the readability of the King James. You know how it's like, oh, we contacted 100 pastors. So he was one of them. So he's done his own video. Now, the audio for this is terrible. It's really bad. You have to turn it up, and it's full of fuzz. And so I won't go through it. I'll actually just show you how bad it is.
I was sitting in my office, minding my own business one day about 2 years ago, when a man called from an organization doing a survey about...
It's not that bad, but I'll just throw that link in there as well. So anyone later on, they can watch that response to Mark Ward there. So anyway, I'll shut that down. Wahhab in super, I might keep that handy for later, but let's continue on.
To do that. We shouldn't do that because the Bible talks at times about difficult and obscure things. Dan referenced some verses in which Peter says that things that Paul wrote are hard to be understood. But we can take the old words out, as it were. We can use current English words instead, and we should. Because the Bible, which I believe with all my heart to be divinely inspired and authoritative, is not silent about the kind of language that we should use in church and I think in Bible translations.
Okay, so just in the chat here, so Ronnie G's like, yeah, that doesn't change the fact that guys like you, Will Kinney, Chris Thomas, are unrepentant in your slander. Okay, so what about what James White said about me? I've well documented that. He slandered me. What about what Mark Ward said about, calling us all Ruckmanites? He actually repented of calling us King James onlyists, but he calls us King James onlyists still. So he admitted that it was wrong. I think Tim Berg twisted his arm with that one. So what about the slander coming from the critical text? Or are you just concerned because you're not on the same team as us? You know, it's like, your favorite political party is getting teased or whatever. And it's like, well, what about what people are saying about the other political party? If you're going to hold us to account for what we're saying, and you're putting us all in one group, well, are you going to hold, James Snap to account for calling me a flat earther? Are you going to hold, Mark Ward to account, James White to account? Many people have said, full-on things to me. I get called all sorts of things all the time, but I'm just like, I don't really care anymore. but I do sort of point out the stupidity of these labels. But anyway, I just thought I'd point that out. Yeah, what's good for the goose is good for the gander, isn't it?
We must take the teachings of the Bible and apply them to our current linguistic situation. And the primary teaching of Scripture that I wish to appeal to is found in 1 Corinthians 14. If you have your Bibles, I invite you to turn to that passage, 1 Corinthians 14. In this passage...
Now, so I did read through pretty much the whole chapter last time in the last section of my video, so I won't bore you guys and go back through it. And if you watched Bryan Ross's latest video on this, he touches on this quite adequately in his latest video that he brought out as a premiere like only a few hours ago.
Paul is urging the rather dysfunctional Corinthian church to stop focusing on themselves and to instead use their gifts in love to build up others. Specifically, he's frustrated with their failure to see that speaking in tongues that people can't understand brings no benefit to those people. Even if those tongues are a divine gift, Paul says that using language people can understand is better. Look now at 1 Corinthians 14:9, and I will read the King James. So likewise ye, except ye utter by the tongue words easy to be understood, how shall it be known what is spoken? For ye shall speak into the air. I will presume on your familiarity with this chapter while I direct your attention 10 verses later to verse 19. In the church, I had rather speak 5 words with my understanding, that by my voice I might teach others also, than 10,000 words in an unknown tongue. Over and over throughout this passage, 1 Corinthians 14, Paul draws out the implications of a principle. Edification requires intelligibility.
So while that can be a principle, at the end of the day, you've got to look at the original context. And so the original context is a completely non-understandable language. So if I was speaking Chinese, if I spoke Chinese for 10 minutes and you didn't understand a word that I was saying, that's exactly what Paul's saying about the gift of speaking in tongues. And so the gift of speaking in tongues, it's unknown. It says in 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 2, that he that speaketh in an unknown tongue speaks to God. And so you're speaking to God. You're not speaking to men. And you're edifying yourself. You're speaking. It says you're praying in the Spirit. You're singing in the Spirit. So it's something that only helps you. In that context, that's what it's talking about. And it's saying prophesying or professing something in a language that benefits others. Okay, so yes, you can grind that down into a principle, but in the original context, it's talking about something that is completely 100% unintelligible, not something that is 99% completely intelligible and just, there's a few archaic words here and there. It's not talking about that at all, is it? Now, we could, maybe, drag that principle over and say, well, there's a few words here and there that, need tidying up and all the rest of it. When you look at the Greek language, like the morphology and syntax of the Greek language hasn't changed that much in the last 2,000 years. Probably about as much as the King James has changed to the English that we use today. Now, in the Byzantine era, you look at the beginning of the Byzantine era to the end of the Byzantine era, they were using a lot of the same terminology for a long, long period of time. Now, I'm sure that contemporary Greek would have changed during those times, okay? But they kept a very stable text with the Byzantine text. And so, for a long period of time, they were using words. And I think some of the variants are actually, some people wanted, that there might have been words that dropped out of usage in their time. And so they've just amended them for an update for something that's readable for people in their generation. So that can be why there's variants and why sometimes we see a synonym used. Mark's often talking about Matthew chapter 2, verse 11, where it talks about they saw baby Jesus or they found baby Jesus. I mean, these are synonyms, and the Greek terms are synonyms, and it's probably just because one of them, Edon, had dropped out of a bit of usage. And so these are just common issues with long-standing texts, okay? But you just can't separate the fact that Mark's like, okay, so we've got this readability issue. Let's jump to the critical text. That's really his end game with this. But anyway, let's just let Mark continue.
He applies that principle to the situation that he sees in Corinth, a situation in which people are abusing the gift of tongues. But I believe this principle applies today.
They actually weren't abusing the gift of tongues because Paul clearly says you give thanks well, but the other is not edified. So he's saying do both. He's saying, look, do the tongues thing, that's fine. But if you always do the tongues thing, when people come and visit, they're going to be like, well, what are you doing? We're not understanding this. But if you do both, pray in the Spirit and with understanding, sing with the Spirit and with understanding, do both, that's better. That's what he's saying. He's not pitting one against the other. He's saying, yeah, do the tongues thing. I speak in tongues more than you all. And then he's like, but in a service, I'd rather make everything intelligible in a church service. And so, it's fine to, he says you give thanks well, but the other is not edified. So in other words, that's great what you're doing. It's not like, no, it's really bad what you're doing. Get with the program. It's like, no, what you're doing is good, but if you want it to be really good and to help others, which is, loving your neighbor as yourself, do this.
Beyond the charismatics and Pentecostals, it applies to all the words that we use in church. And I think it applies not just to whole languages, but to the minutiae, to the individual words.
So that's where he's taking it out of context, of course, because he's saying, I don't think it's to do with just the whole language, but just the words. It's like, well, okay, well, that's your point of view, but most people read that as to do with, a whole language, like translating from Latin. Translating Bibles into Latin, that was all the rave. But then they started translating Bibles into English and into German, into other languages. And so many times they were using this verse as a backup verse for saying, well, there's nothing wrong with having the Bible in your own language. Now, in that context, they're talking about a whole completely different language. Because if you've got the average person who's, like a mother of 4, who's like 35 years old, living in England, and, they're just doing their thing. Are they going to know Latin? Probably not. And so, but they're going to know English. So their argument was for the translation of the Bible into the English language. And the Catholics were still against that. They were saying it's a paper pope. They were saying that it's wrong to do this. We shouldn't have this. Average people shouldn't have this type of access to the scriptures and all this sort of stuff. But Mark's going, okay, well, I read it as the minutia. Well, you're in the minority there, Mark. If you read the preface for the Bishop's Bible, for the Geneva Bible, for the Coverdale Bible, for the Great Bible, when they use this verse, and oftentimes they're using this verse, or also another verse, which is search ye the scriptures, like especially in the Bishop's Bible preface, it uses that quite a lot, which in the New King James says, you search the scriptures. When Jesus is saying, read the Bible, he's saying, search you all should be searching the scriptures. But in the New King James, it says, you are already searching the scriptures, and in them they speak of me. And it's like, no, it's the wrong reading. And so that's another place in the New King James that I just remembered. But yeah, so Mark's in the minority. The Reformation period, they weren't looking at that particular verse in 1 Corinthians 14 and saying, it doesn't apply to whole languages. Mark's like, yeah, so we're like, it applies to like someone speaking Chinese to you. And Mark's like, no, it's to do with, words you have to look up in a dictionary, sort of thing. It's like, no. And so this is why we've actually pulled him over the coals quite a few times on this issue and just said, look, Mark, I understand you're using this verse, but you're misusing the verse. It just doesn't look good for you to do this. I understand you got this good slogan, understanding requires intelligibility. Great slogan, but it's not what it's talking about. It's talking about their gift of tongues, which was completely foreign to the person hearing it. So anyway.
When Catholic priests shouldn't randomly sprinkle Latin into their speech like Pater Noster, because Latin is a dead language no one understands. And 1 Corinthians 14 says edification requires intelligibility. Messianic Jews shouldn't toss random Hebrew words that people don't know into their worship or into their Bible translations, like drash and lashon hara. Those are real-life examples I just drew from a Messianic Bible translations. And no one should insist on the exclusive use of a Bible translation that contains many, many archaic and obsolete words and senses that people do not know anymore, not when accurate words that they do know are readily available in contemporary English. Now, as soon as I make that last point, many good...
Okay, I'm just going to rewind that because I was just thinking about something I sort of vagued out.
People do not know anymore, not when accurate words that they do know are readily available in contemporary English.
Okay, so he's saying we've already got these Bible versions out there. Why aren't we just jumping into them? Okay.
Now, as soon as I make that last point, many good Christian people that I love feel their defenses rise up. They know that I have the King James Version in mind. They tell me it's not hard to learn the these and the thous, that everybody in their family and in their church understands the King James just fine. But above all, they tell me that if someone struggles to understand the King James, he or she can just pull out a dictionary. Now, let's think about that. For some words, I think that's true, sort of. You're reading along in Romans 13. Romans 13:13 is a passage I often go to when I'm talking about archaic words in the King James. And you read this list that we often call a vice list, a list of sins. And Paul lists, he says, let us walk honestly as in the day, not in rioting and drunkenness, not in chambering and wantonness. Now, I looked these words up, chambering and wantonness, because I never used them as a kid. I did not know these words until recent years. As it happens, the dictionary that I use every day defines chambering as placing a bullet in the chamber of a gun, which I assure you, Paul was not forbidding. Paul was for our Second Amendment rights. Amen? My contemporary dictionary does not give a suitable sense for that word. It failed me here. My contemporary dictionary gives several possibilities for wantonness, but not the right one. If you look up chambering and wantonness in the dictionary the way I was instructed to do growing up in a good King James only church that I still love and just visited about 1.5 years ago, you will face some confusion.
Okay, so let's see how hard this is. Okay, we'll leave our Wahhab in super issue because Mark doesn't want to go there. But let's go to chambering. Chambering meaning, okay, on Google. Okay, chambering of a gun. Okay, so usually just don't go to the first definition. Well, usually what I would do, we've got the King James Bible Dictionary there. But I would probably go to Wiktionary. Wiktionary is great. Chamber, the chamber of a gun. Actually, I'll type in chamber in the gerund of chamber, chamber of a gun or a firearm, chamber, a private room, a bedroom. Okay, let's just go back to Google. Now, usually I would type in chambering etymology. The first place I'd go to is the etymological dictionary, which is this one, etymon line. Chamber, a room of a house, usually a private one. Like, a chamber, the upper chambers sort of thing. Old French word, the latrine privy, bedroom utensil for containing urine, a gunnery, chamber music, chamber to restrain or shut up as in a chamber, to furnish with a chamber implied. Okay, so there actually isn't that much on chamber. So, it's probably good that I'm doing this in real time because it's like, okay, well, there isn't that much there on chamber. Now, I didn't really want to have to read through all this on Wiktionary. So this is just chamber. Chambler, a room or set of rooms, private room, bedroom, a private office or judge, a room used for deliberation by a legislator, a law office, firearms, historical. Okay, so that's where I would go to the Trinitarian Bible Society. Trinitarian Bible Society. I would go to their articles. And I would go to the word list, which I think is down the bottom. Translation, search the scriptures, study Bibles. Maybe I'll just type in ARC. Okay. So I'm just going to find this. But I used to have in my Bible, I used to have the actual article. It was a small little pamphlet, and it had about 700 words in it, which you could just look up at any time if you struggled with a word. And the vast majority of the time, it had that word there. Okay, where is it? I think it's actually like a calendar as well, or a Bible reading plan. Italics, validity, receive text. Okay. Devotion, doctrine, English versions. Okay, so let's type in Bible. There's 32 of them. Struggling here a little bit. Bible word list and reading plan. Here we go. So this is just the PDF of that. Okay, so here we have, we're up to B, go down to chambering. Chambering. Essential wanton living. Turn that off because it's chewing up my bandwidth. But if I went to the first one that I saw, which was the King James Bible Online or something like that, or King James Dictionary, this one here, there's plenty of these websites as well. So, okay, so this one's actually run by a friend of mine, and he runs the Textus Receptus Bibles site. So, if you go here, Textus Receptus Bibles. Another way that you can look up words without getting tripped up by modern definitions is by going, to the interlinear. I'll go to that in a sec. Or basically chambering Webster's Dictionary, wanton, lewd, immodest behavior. Okay, and it's got the scripture verse there. But if we go to Romans, is it 13:13? I think it is. 13:13. So the 2016 that I've got, not in lewdness and lust. So it has not in chambering and wantonness. So looking at, Bishop's Bible has chambering and wantonness, Great Bible, chambering and wantonness, Matthew's chambering and wantonness. So it's quite a popular way of saying these words back in the Reformation period. And so obviously that's, those words have changed. So Young's has chamberings there in 1862, so it was still understandable then. And lasciviousness. Lasciviousness is. So let's look at wantonness. Okay, let's see how I would get to understand wantonness. So wantonness, I would go to etymology. Or actually, the first place I'd look at is a Trinitarian Bible Society list. That's where I go. So etymology of wanton, resistant to control, willful, the Middle English privative word forming, so it goes through and talks about that. It's quite a lot to read. And I know you guys are probably bored by now. But I would just go through that same process. If we just put wantonness here, it's got the 1828 dictionary. So most King James people go to the 1828. I go to the etymology dictionary first because I find it's very interesting, and it usually just goes back to German and French and a bunch of other things. I go to Wiktionary. A Wiktionary is a bit like a Wikipedia type of thing, so anyone can put anything on there, but usually it is quite good. Here we have the state of the state or characteristic of being wanton, reckless, especially as represented in lascivious or excessive behavior. And then it's got some usage there, which is always very important to look at. And so anyway, that's how I would look those words up. Then I would look at some of the other Bibles around here. But that's for myself to get what I've got here. So I've already gone through and done this for the last 20 years, going through dictionaries, going through Webster's, going through the Oxford English Dictionary, and looking up these words, and going through the word lists that are mentioned in the Trinitarian Bible Society list, D.A. Waite's Defined King James Bible. And so anyway, I think you're getting the point that it's not that difficult. There's quite a lot of places where you can, if you don't find it immediately in one place, you can go to another, and so now would I trust just going, okay, let's just go to the New King James there? Sometimes yes, the vast majority of the time yes, but not always. And so that's one of the problems is it's like in Proverbs, it talks about having a foot out of joint. You've sprained your ankle and you go to put pressure on it and you can't stand up. You end up falling over. And sometimes definitions in the New King James, or specifically in the Old Testament, it's really bad. You go to stand on the New King James and it fails. It's not saying the same thing as the King James. And so when you're studying the intricate things of eschatology, for example, and you're going through Isaiah and it doesn't say the same thing, or it says the opposite thing, you're like, man, that's one of the reasons why I moved away from it, because I just kept getting annoyed at it was saying different things. And so, and they say in the New King James preface says that they went to the Septuagint, they went to the Targums, they went to a bunch of other things in the Old Testament. They admit that they're doing that. So let's continue.
But in 1611, when the King James was translated, regular people knew that chambering meant sexual immorality and wantonness meant something like sensuality. I'll leave aside for the moment the question of why you should have to look up these words at all when there are perfectly good contemporary English alternatives. They're just as accurate.
Okay, so I've listened to this debate, but I haven't seen this. Okay, so what does study mean in 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 15? So I'm going to have to go through this study thing again. It's so simple, but it's like, Mark just basically has proclaimed that study should say be diligent. But when you read the context, it's be diligent in your mind, which we have a word for. It's called studying. What does study mean in 2 Timothy 2:15? To study is to strive towards, to direct one's effort to set one's mind on, to devote oneself to something. 71% of people said that. To study is to devote time and attention to the acquisition of knowledge of an academic subject, especially, I guess it's saying Bible study, 25%. To study is to consider or ponder quietly. I don't know. So there are other places where study does appear in the King James, and I'm pretty sure that when it says, study to be quiet, it's like that's an aim. It's not the same as study in a sense of like a study, exercising your mind. It's not the word study. You can have a word that means 3 or 4 different things. Okay, now that usage of the word study has completely dropped out. We don't usually say, when it's like make it your aim, study to be quiet. We would say, aim. That's one of the synonyms that for that archaic usage of study. But in 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 15, it's very clear that study is still warranted. The main reason that people don't know that you should use study there is because they're not understanding the usage of spedalzo, and they're not understanding the context. Now, in the Counter-Reformation, what do Catholics want you to do with your Christianity? They want you to be diligent. Okay, so just be a diligent person, run around, do works, do things that are pleasing to God, and God will accept you. Okay, so if you half quote this verse, and you have the spedalzo there, so spedalzo can mean be diligent, and it can mean study. It depends on the context. You have a lexical definition, but you have a contextual definition. The contextual definition will show you which lexical definition to use. And so being diligent is like an umbrella term. And under that umbrella term comes the philosophical concept of study when it's warranted. Okay, so if we have the verse, study to shew thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. Now, how do you rightly divide the word of truth? Well, if you got the Bible out, how do you rightly divide the Bible? Does it just happen automatically? Does it happen if you're just diligent and running around? Or do we have a word for this, which is you study things? You study things out, because there are two usages. There is the concept of being diligent, and that's translated that way in the King James as well. But here specifically, it's a diligence of the mind, because most people actually half quote this verse. They say, be diligent to show yourself approved to God, a workman that doesn't need to be ashamed. And you're like, oh, okay, I'm being diligent. I'm showing myself approved to God, and I won't be ashamed. But it clearly says rightly dividing the word of truth. So that context causes the definition of spedalzo to be philosophical, which is a study. It is a diligence of the mind. And what's really interesting too is there is actually a French, the Olivetan Bible of 1535. I'm pretty sure he was the stepfather of Stephanus. I could be wrong there, but he is related somehow. Now they actually use the word etudi, and that only means study. And still to today, it only means study. That's the only definition for it. It doesn't mean diligent. It means to study. It means an exercise in your mind. So that is the 1535. Now, other Bibles in other languages, they do have the concept of being diligent. But as I said, it's the umbrella term, which in that context, it's saying be diligent in your mind, because it's rightly dividing the word of truth. The Catholics would just have us being diligent. The Protestants, with their so-called paper pope and studying the scriptures, we are to study them, and we have a word for that in English. We have the word study. It's not just be diligent, in your mind. Well, we can refine that down to studying to rightly divide the word of truth. So spedalzo, all you have to do is remember spedalzo, when it's talking about a philosophical concept, is a study. Even to the point where if you go to Greece today, if you want to do higher learning or go to university, it's called spedalzo. It's a study. It's further learning. Even in the Byzantine era, they would call places where people went to study the word of God, like rooms, they would call them spedalzo. That's what they were called. It's a study. Have you ever? I remember my dad had a study, and it was just a desk, and he smoked a pipe, and ciggies, and had a goldfish there, and that was his study. People in the Byzantine era had a spedalzo. But what's really interesting is that 1535 French Bible only has the word study there. That word study doesn't mean being diligent. So other languages they haven't really, they don't really need that distinction. In English, we have so many different words from Latin and French and German, and we have a whole bunch of different words we can use. And so when we refine it down, it's study. People who just want to be diligent, they are not understanding the verse in its context. So hopefully that clears it up for you. But, Mark Ward's done a video on this. I don't find it compelling at all. When I watch it, I just get vexed. So anyway.
Because when you read the King James, at least you recognize that you do need to look these up, chambering and wantonness. You know that they're dead words, that time has killed them with 500 wounds. We just don't use them anymore. And you don't know them. But what about words that you don't know? What about what I call false friends? How many of you took the quiz that I and my good friend Caleb Richardson gave to you, the pre-debate quiz? Can I just see a quick raise of hands around here? We got a lot of participation. Are you curious to know the answers? I was curious to know how you do. It's a bit of a risk to do something like this live. We'll see how it goes. I actually did prepare 2 polls.
Okay, so Dwayne is saying the Trinitarian Bible Society only lists 6 differences. I guess this is relating to the earlier question about the TR editions, I guess. There are differences indeed of translation, but I think that's a different matter than saying it's not a TR. Okay, so maybe I'm sort of missing a little bit there of what was said. So I might just go back up to that question. And also, yeah, that was a good comment. Ask Nehemiah about potential testing on dystigmai. That's pretty dorky, but I am going to ask him that. How many differences must there be from the TR in order for it to be not considered a TR anymore? I just don't even go with percentages and Erasmus. I just go with, well, we have something that's 100%. I guess it's a bit like how much dirt would you put in a soup? It's like, well, there might be a grain of dirt, or there might be 15 grains of dirt, or there might be a whole handful of dirt, or it's like, I don't want any. And so I guess, going through all the percentages and all that sort of stuff, it's like, and I guess too, it just depends on how you're defining what a TR is. Because most people just define all the Greek Bibles of that era as a TR. But then, someone like Jeff Riddle, he's like, well, I only go with, the 1546 onwards, of, I guess maybe he goes with the 1534 of Colonnaeus. He has mentioned that. No, I think he was saying that that's a different edition, and it departs from the TR in some places. And so anyway, it's sort of, I guess, unless you got all the data in front of you, it is hard to go, okay, well, this one's closer or this one's further away. But I would just say it was a work in progress, and they nailed it. By the time they got to 1611, it was completely worked out. All those issues were ironed out. Okay, let's continue.
One for people who are already familiar with my work. That would be kind of cheating. And one for those who are not familiar. We're going to go over the results of the latter poll. Let's see how those in the audience, both here and online, did on my short KJV false friends quiz. First, can we get it up? Here we go. Study to...
Yeah, so I think what Dwayne is saying here, it's misleading to say the New King James is a critical text translation. I mean, I would say only uninformed people are really saying that, or people with such a huge bias that they're just like, oh, it's a critical text Bible. But what I would say is that there are places where it does follow the critical text clearly, and they claim that they're following the Textus Scrivener, and they don't. and when you look at an NIV or you look at NASB, you can see these type of readings in the New King James, and to me, they've just sort of copied from those editions and inadvertently dragged some critical text, thinking that it's just being an update, but they've dragged the underlying text with them, sort of thing.
Show thyself approved did not mean in 1611 hit the books and engage in academic research.
So GD says, Nick, why does the Trinitarian Bible Society offer versions in modern language, in other languages, but the same is so criticized in English? Well, I think it's because people are so skeptical of what has happened. But that's one of my arguments, because I contacted the Trinitarian Bible Society. I contacted them like 20 years ago and said, would you guys ever do an update? And they are actually bound by their constitution to not update the authorized version. So I think as the furthest they can go is the typesetting. They might be able to release some words from italics, like in 1 John chapter 2 verse 23. Places like that where the italics there are really reflecting the 1550 text. They're not really that helpful for anyone anymore, and so it's like, well, let's just get rid of those italics. And so places like that. But yeah, it is one of those things where the Trinitarian Bible Society are really interested in what I'm doing with the Urdu Bible. So we're just putting that into Word at the moment. So we're basically getting to the point where we're just about to bring it to the printers, and so that's quite a big job with a Urdu script that you read backwards. It's sort of like Arabic writing. So that's something that we're doing. But the Trinitarian Bible Society very interested in what I'm doing, and we're trying to make it readable for the average person. But when you bring that over to English, you're a devil. You know what I mean? And I've been called all that for years. So people are like, oh, Nick says is doing an update, and who does he think he is? Does he think he's Lancelot Andrews and blah blah blah? And it's like, no, I don't. I understand my limitations, but I do take a rule of thumb from the William Carey Bible Society of just trying to do something rather than just do nothing. And so my aim has actually been, because when I'd go to Papua New Guinea, people give me boxes of New King James Bibles, but sometimes they would be the ones that have all the footnotes, and I'd be like, oh. So we worked out the ones that didn't have the footnotes. But even just in giving the New King James, I was like, man, I know there's readings in this that aren't accurate. So that's one of the main reasons why I worked on what I did. So then so it's sort of like I've gone through all the modern TR editions, examined them, and seen if they've accurately brought across the words. Now, some people have pointed out where there's inaccuracies, and I'm really glad for that. And over the past, because it came out as a 2016 edition, so it's 2024 now, so that's nearly 8 years ago that edition's been online, and people constantly contact me about that, and say, what about this word, and what about this place? You've just sort of followed another TR edition here, or you followed the modern King James here, where you haven't got the nuance that the Greek brings out. And Helg's done a really good study on that. I know Chris Yates says he's critiqued the simplified King James version. So I'm going through all those as well, just looking at what they're saying. But at the end of the day, I don't think there's anything wrong with an update. So that's the thing. When I'm going through this debate, I can understand what Dan's saying. I can understand what Mark's saying. But to me, Mark is not, he's disingenuous in a sense where he wants to drag you to the critical text, where I'm perfectly, if you can understand the King James, you want to read it, mate, go for it. I will not tell you to put that thing down. But in places like, I just spent 3 weeks in Pakistan. A lot of people are reading English there. There's signs in English. A lot of things are just in English. And so they do read English Bibles there. Not everyone, but a lot of people who are, studying theology, they'll be required to read English Bibles. So they'll get the easiest one they can. They'll get their NIV or an ESV. And I'm just like, well, no, just get a TR Bible. Use mine, use because it's like, well, my base level is New King James. Okay. I don't recommend anything below that. But that's my base level in a sense of if you can't give them anything else, it's like, oh, here you go. But I want people to get to the stage where they can read the King James. But in the meanwhile, there are people in the Philippines, there's people in Papua New Guinea, people in Indonesia. I've been to all these countries, Fiji. Many of them speak English. Many of them carry around English Bibles, but they are just grabbing these modern versions, or they're grabbing the New King James with all these footnotes and they're getting confused because I got hugely attacked. In the first year of my Christianity, I actually crossed out every single marginal note in the New King James because I felt that it was attacking my faith. I would read through and go, well, that verse isn't in there. And so I'd get a pen and just cross it out because it was like a little devil's there going, see, they don't really know which words are there, And so I'm crossing them all out. And people are like, how come you got all these words crossed out in your Bible? It was in the reference, in the margins. But I understand what it's like to have that type of doubt, and that's why eventually I was studying and comparing the New King James with the Old, and I just got to the stage where I was like, the King James is superior, and that the Easter thing really broke it for me. Anyway, I should get back to this.
Meant be diligent to show yourself approved. And as it happens, you guys did very well on that one. Those of you who got it wrong in the way I would have predicted.
But see, look at this. This to me, this is not. This is him straining at a gnat. Look at the definition that he's saying is correct. To study is to strive towards, so the spedauzo concept, to direct one's efforts to set one's mind on. That's study. You know what I mean? We have a word for that, study. To devote oneself to something. Now, if in the context, it's rightly dividing the word of truth, study is a perfect word for that. And this is where I think he's actually done his video. He's probably been alerted to, Will Kinney or, a whole bunch of people have done, studies into the word study and spedauzo. And, I've done quite a bit myself, and he's probably been alerted to it. So he's put it here, a study is to set one's mind on. But isn't he saying, no, it should be diligent? That's what he's saying. But then here it's saying to set your mind on. To study is to devote time and attention to the acquisition of knowledge on an academic subject. Okay, but isn't that to set your mind on? So he's got it in the first one and in the second one. And then it's like, okay, to consider or ponder quietly. No one said that, and one person said, I don't know. But it seems like he's got this definition here, devoting time to the acquisition of knowledge on an academic subject. Now, I understand that the word spedauzo, yes, in modern Greek, it means university or college. It wouldn't have that exact name, or that exact definition, because that's something that has evolved from that, okay, from just a humble word of study to, a school sort of thing. But clearly here he's got the same definition. To study is to strive towards or direct one's effort to set one's mind on, which is to study, to devote oneself to something. So he's got to set one's mind on, but here it's you devote time and attention to the acquisition of knowledge. on an academic subject. So he's clearly just saying, well, if you are saying it's just an academic thing, but then you have to define what is an academic subject. Well, the Bible is an academic pursuit. So that's setting one's mind on something. I just can't really find the difference here. Anyway, to me, that's confusing, because the way that Mark Ward talks about this is, yes, it shouldn't be study. It should be diligent. But he's clearly got it, a diligence of the mind in both the definitions. One just seems to go a little bit further with an academic subject.
Those of you who got it wrong in the way I would have predicted. You went for this option: studying is devoting time and attention to the acquisition of knowledge. Let's move on to halt, however. Halt did not mean in 1611 to waver or hesitate, or to come to an abrupt stop, which is how I always took it. How long halt ye? Like, halt, who goes there? Instead, it meant to limp. And there was 6% of the audience who got that.
Well, when one of your legs stops, you limp. If two of your legs stop, you become lame. So halt, it says here, halt is to limp or to be lame. So that would be the equivalent to halt is to come to an abrupt stop. If your leg comes to an abrupt stop and you can't move it anymore, you limp. If both your legs come to an abrupt stop, you are lame. And so these words are actually related. I think that Mark's not really, like, I understand the word, the German word halt just means stop the vast majority of the time. Now he's got to halt is to waver or hesitate. But if you are limping, there is a wavering there. You're limping. You're skipping. There's a hesitation there to put weight on your leg because it's not working properly. Okay, so we're talking about 1 Kings 18:21. Now, it's been a long time since I've gone through the halt issue. 1 Kings 18:21. How long halt ye between two opinions? Well, and what I showed last time was that James White on the front cover of his book, he has the word halt. He has how long halt ye between two opinions. And so let's go to all English translations. So let's check this out. How long halt ye between two opinions? How long go ye limping between the two sides? Is that more understandable? You're limping between two sides, over here and over, like, I guess, like a drunk. How long will you hesitate between? So Amplified has hesitate. How long will you halt and limp between two opinions? How long halt ye? How long will you waver? So the CSB actually has to waver or hesitate, and he's saying that's wrong. So this is a modern version. The CSB, I can't remember, Christian Standard Bible, I can't remember what year that came out. Okay, it's only recent, and I'm pretty sure Mark Ward brought out his book in 2019 or something. They're saying waiver there. So is it just a King James issue? If we have to get rid of the King James, surely we've got to get rid of the CSB for having waiver, because the King James is correct. He's not saying the King James is wrong. He's saying the King James is perfectly correct. It's just that these words have become, the meaning has changed. But this is just incorrect. So obviously you've got to get rid of that. Okay, how long will you hobble back and forth, CEB? How long are you going to jump back and forth? Have things both ways. Halt is a derby. Halt between two sides. You must decide what you're going to do now. How long you keep jumping from one side to the other? So jumping. The English Revised Version, I'm pretty sure that's the Westcott and Hort. Oh, no, sorry, easy to read, 2006. Okay, well, it's easy to read, but it does seem to have jumping from one side to the other. Okay, so I won't bore you with going through all that. Let's just continue on. But I just thought I'd show you that half the time we go through these modern versions aren't really going with Mark Ward's definitions either. So who do we trust here? Do we trust that Mark Ward has got all this ironed out? And so, because sometimes, like Spedalzo, I just go, well, he's wrong there, with Holt, I can certainly see where to limp or to lame, there's something stopped in your body for you to be limp or for you to be lame. And I'm not against an update there, and like I pointed out in John chapter 5, verses 3 and 4, it has the word halt there in the King James. Now, I've got the word lame here in this one, but then there's 42 words missing just after that. So he's not interested in the missing friends. He says, oh, what about false friend? This is a false friend. What about the missing friends? And what about these modern Bibles that have these wrong definitions, apparently? Is he going to pull them over the coals like he's done with the King James? Or is he just picking on us? Okay, let's continue.
So that did not mean in 1611 in a context like this one, in order that, for the purpose of, with the result of. That's the way we use that phrase. But in that verse, 1 Kings 8:25, it actually meant on condition that, provided that, so long as, and the Hebrew is quite literally, if only. By and by did not mean in 1611, after a while, in the sweet by and by. That means after a while, in the future. That's not what it meant in 1611. It actually meant immediately, which is what the Greek says. And let's see how you did. By and by means immediately. It was 15% of you who got that right. It is utterly clear. It is not debatable. In the dictionary, in the Oxford English Dictionary, it shows back then in 1611, it meant immediately. And the Greek word there in those passages, the one I showed you, meant immediately. Now, finally, mansions. Okay, mansions did not mean in 1611 a large, stately, opulent residence. It meant each of a number of separate dwelling places or apartments in a large house or group of buildings. I'm actually shocked and pleased to see as many people getting this right as did. But those 34%, why did you get it wrong if you got it wrong? I'm not here to mock you. I'm on the same page with you. You got it wrong.
Okay, so what's the difference here? Okay, so you got a mansion. It's a large, stately, opulent residence. Okay, and then it's like, okay, a mansion is each of a number of separate dwelling places or apartments in a large house or group of buildings. I guess that's what it says there. Or a mansion is the action of remaining, living, or staying in a place, and I don't know. So the first two, it's like, okay, so one's a large, stately, opulent residence. So that definition there can be something like in the New Jerusalem, you can have that definition. A mansion is a large, stately, opulent residence. But he's saying, no, it has to be a mansion is each of a number of separate dwelling places or apartments in a large house. So they're houses within a house. It's like, and so I know, some of these Bibles say rooms and dwelling places and all this sort of stuff. Now, he's saying, mansions just meant rooms, but there are plenty of places in the Bible. And one thing that I thought of, which would be interesting, is going through the Old Testament with the word Beth and looking at everywhere how Beth is translated, because that just means a house. and looking at other synonymous terms and palaces and things like that. What they are translated as. But anyway, I just, it's like he's really splitting hairs with these definitions. Anyway, let's continue.
Got it wrong. I'm not here to mock you. I'm on the same page with you. You got it wrong because you do not speak Elizabethan English. You speak contemporary English. These are 5 false friends. King James words that you thought you knew, but you didn't, some of you. King James words that we still use today, but that we use differently than did the Elizabethans. And I want to make absolutely clear to let you know, King James false friends are not the fault of the King James translators. They're not errors in the King James version. They were fine.
Okay, so Ronnie G says, Nick, have you seen the post by Scriptorian Bibles about Mark Ward recently? Why do you not see that as slander in sin? I read through that and just went, okay, well, that's your opinion. But see, the thing is, Mark Ward slanders all of us as sort of like illiterate dimwits. If you go through his videos, he has clips of people like the Wormwoods. It's Danny DeVito and the movie Matilda. So he's the teacher who's trying to teach Matilda the proper way. But, Danny DeVito is like, who needs education? We don't need scholars and just drinking beer. And he's saying this is like a King James onlyist. And so I showed that video, over and over and over just to show how slanderous Mark Ward was, because he's often passive aggressive. He'll say the positive things that he's trying to do, but at the same time, he's just throwing you under the bus. And so, you're talking about Scriptorian Bibles. I would say what you need to go through that video, which is called "Why I Don't Trust the Scholars" or something. It's got Mark going like this on the cover of it, on the picture. And I would say go through that and then send a letter to Mark and say, why are you slandering people? Why did he apologize for calling us all King James onlyists and repent of that? But then he still calls us King James onlyists. Why does he call us all Ruckmanites? When the vast majority of people who I interact with are not Ruckmanites and have nothing to do with Peter Ruckman and actually come against Ruckmanism. And so that is slander. And so you're saying, oh, I need to clear this up and all the rest of it. Okay, well, you go and do your due diligence and talk to Mark about this. Talk to James White about saying that I'm desperate and obsessed and all this. So he used to make these claims. He's actually made claims that TR people still believe today. It's quite amazing. I'd be talking to people and they're like, oh, Nick, you this and that. I'm like, well, that came from James White. Don't believe what he's saying. I was actually allowing him to run his mouth just to see how far he would go. And I was like, I don't even think the guy's a Christian. That's how far I got with him. I was like, this guy is just completely slandering me. And even to the point where my unsaved relatives were going, who's this James White guy? What's he saying about you now? And I'd say, well, he's saying this, and that. And they're like, who is he? I'm like, just some American guy who's an apologist. Everyone thinks he's the guru, but it's like, man, he's just a complete liar. He's just slandering me to the back teeth. And then, he would just call me desperate and, say all sorts of things. So I put all that documentation in my Revelation 16:5 book because it was quite amazing to me how I got treated. The first thing James White ever said to me was I was a Ruckmanite. It was like, okay, I'm a Ruckmanite. There you go. How many Ruckmanites have worked on a Textus Receptus King James edition update? That's just the insanity of these people, And so, I would like you, Ronnie, to contact James White, contact Mark Ward, ask them about the slander that they've been saying about me. And then we can clean up a Facebook group. These people have been doing it publicly on their videos, saying this sort of stuff over and over and over. I don't even know who Scriptorian Bibles is. He's an anonymous guy. Now, he puts up posts there, and I go through it and go, well, sometimes I say things. I say, look, I don't really think that it's helpful to say that Mark Ward's effeminate. I know people in Australia who talk exactly like Mark Ward, and no one would ever say they're effeminate. One of the videos, because I'm just sort of updating my or refreshing my YouTube just to check, videos that come out about the debate. And there was one guy with boxing gloves on. He's like, he's effeminate. And it's like, well, is that your argument? You know what I mean? It's just like, he's a queer, that guy. It's like, well, okay, but have a little bit more to say, because it actually reflects more so on a person just saying that. Because I'm pretty sure those people saying that, if I looked at a photo of them, I could say, well, you look like an idiot. You look like a this and like a that. You could say a million things about them. And are they being public? Can I critique their voice? Can I critique their life? And so sometimes I say things just to go, why bother with this sort of nonsense? But when you jump onto the other, anti-King James groups all over the internet, they'll just say, oh, King James is a homosexual. It's like, where's the proof for this? He had 8 kids. He wrote a book against homosexuality. Even his enemies weren't calling him a homosexual while he was alive or anything like that. And it's like, oh, no, he just is, Oh, I guess David and Jonathan were too. I guess Jesus probably was. Erasmus was, It just, these books are written where everyone is, And so anyway, let's continue.
Translations in 1611. They're false friends today because English has changed in such a way that we do not realize we are misunderstanding. And lest you think that I'm playing an arrogant parlor trick that's meant to mock other people's ignorance, I want to note something very, very important. All of the responses to this quiz tonight that I gave were anonymous, except for one, mine. Guess what score I got on this quiz before I entered this work? I was a very studious spelling bee champion, King James onlyist growing up. And I got 0 of those words. I misunderstood all of these. We're in the same boat. I got an F-. I did not realize my mistakes until I studied Hebrew and Greek, and more importantly, started reading contemporary English Bible translations that use my English instead of someone else's. And I missed far more than 5 false friends. I've cataloged on my channel so far 86 King James false friends, a number which, Lord willing, by the end of the year will reach 100.
And it's just like, I've already gone through them. You know what I mean? Like, when I watch these things, I'm like, oh yeah, actually I studied that, 15 years ago. I remember studying that word, but Mark's just sort of come along like, I'm enlightening people about this. Well, even Will Kinney, the vast majority of these things have been talked about by him. Bible Protector, probably 10 years ago, talked all about this. So Mark's just sort of come along and going, you realize it's an old book and there's old words, and people are like, yeah, well, but most people would rather have an old book which has all the words rather than a new one that has all these deletions. But not only that, but has all these errors. That's one of the main problems is these modern Bibles have a lot of errors in them. And so...
and that isn't even my whole file. I've got more that I could do. I'm just going to stop at 100. Those 100 false friends occur a total of around 2,000 times in the King James. Aren't you at least a little curious to know what King James words you don't know?
Okay, so GD says that the word satraps is a more accurate rendition in the New King James. It's like, no, okay. I guess you would have to prove that to us.
No, you don't know. Do you want to understand your Bibles the way I do? Because God is speaking to us through Scripture. I think you do, or you wouldn't be here, unless the Dayspring Bible College students were required to come, in which case, I don't know what to say to you. You can check out, if you're curious, my huge King James False Friends playlist on my YouTube channel. And I want to tell you, I will not just give you fish. I will teach you how to fish. There are many King James onlyists, my brothers in Christ, who will hand out long lists of archaic words in the King James. And if you think to look up these words, you'll actually find study, like in D.A. Waite's Defined King James Bible. He has it right there. Greek means be diligent, he says.
Yeah, and in a philosophical concept, in philosophical contexts, it means to study. It's a diligence of the mind.
But I will teach you not only, I won't just give you fish, I'll actually show you. If you'll go through my channel, I'll show you how to find these words. I just want people to understand and be edified by God's word. False friends happen to every text, in every language, because language changes over time. I got that terminology from a famous linguist, and it's used even in discussions of Shakespeare. So a peculiar people doesn't mean what you think it means. Every creature of God is good doesn't mean what you think it means. Remove not the ancient landmark doesn't mean what you think it means. It's one thing to tell people to look up words that have died since the King James was translated, like chambering and wantonness. I think that pushes the boundary of 1 Corinthians 14. Why not just use contemporary English words that most people already know? Is God incapable of speaking in contemporary English? But at least it's possible, if you don't know the words, you can go look them up. But how are people supposed to look up King James words they do not realize they're misunderstanding? My dear brothers and sisters, this is the question.
So I'm sort of dealing with this Ronnie G guy. I know it might be tiring for some of you guys who just wanted me to go through this. But he's like, what are you talking about, Nick? You guys are Christians, are you not? If James White slanders someone, that is sin. It doesn't make it right to respond in slander back. Well, I'm not doing that. Where am I doing that? If people are doing that in a group somewhere, I mean, lots of people are doing that. Like Mark's doing that in his videos. So you should hold him accountable for that. You should hold James White because he's in your group, isn't he? You're just saying we're all part of this group. Anyone can join the Textus Receptus Academy. I don't vet anyone. People just join and they say whatever they want. And it's like if they get to the point where they're just shouting and it's just all ridiculous, I won't have anything to do with them. Now, someone like Scriptorian Bibles, I don't know who he is. He's an anonymous guy. He's come on the scene. He's, some of the things that he said has been okay. Some of the things that he said, I'm just sort of like rolling my eyes going, well, that doesn't necessarily need to be said. It's just sort of like saying, this guy's a bozo, idiot, fool, moron. And so, okay, well, what else you got to say, that's of substance that we can work on. But it's like, I'm hoping that he's getting influenced by other people of how to act and how to respond, And so, So anyway, I just thought I'd throw that in.
I come with. I have asked this question to my King James only brothers over and over again, and I ask it to my brother Dan Haifley. How are King James readers supposed to look up words they do not realize they're misunderstanding? The only thing close to an answer that I've gotten to this question is that, well, people should just look up all the words in the King James. But doesn't that just defeat the purpose of translation? Why not just send people to look up the Hebrew and Greek words instead? Those are the ones God actually inspired.
Because learning a completely different language is really hard. Just learn the Greek, and half the time it's like, oh, I know the Greek word, spedalzo means this, and they're wrong. People say, oh, agapeo and phileo, they, one's the love of God and one's I love a pizza, they have this whole concept. How many pastors have you heard you talk about phileo and agapeo, and they're just completely wrong? They're actually synonymous. And the interaction with Jesus and Peter, where he says, do you love me, feed my sheep and all that, read through that, look at the Greek words, and you'll see they're synonymous. But almost every pastor who comes out of Bible college is sprouting this rubbish, and it's just wrong. And so Mark's like, yeah, you should learn Greek. It's like, well, people are trying to learn Greek, but they're getting it wrong. They're getting the outcome of what a Greek word means. You should be able to go, okay, this is what it means in English, but they're getting that wrong. And that's why people are just going with a lexical definition here with spedalzo and saying, oh, it's diligence, and instead of really studying what the word means. And so, anyway, let's continue.
The King James, hear me here, is far more intelligible to modern English speakers than Hebrew and Greek is. The King James is not entirely unintelligible. But it's an impossibly brilliant fifth grader who knows where to look up the dead words, let alone how to identify and define all the false friends. And no one is likely to teach the fifth graders my false friends, I'm afraid, because King James only pastors don't know them either. I gave a 20-question false friends quiz to 100 King James only pastors last year. You got some of the questions that they got. You did better than them on several of them.
And so, yeah, like I said earlier, I put that link in the chat about that guy who was on the receiving end of this phone call, and he believes that what Mark Wall was doing and the test that they did was not genuine. He said, like, when they were talking about plural and singular, there was like 10 examples and 9 of them were like plural or something like, or singular. I can't remember exactly which one, but he said it was like there was only one that wasn't. Now, he got them all right, but he said it was worded in a way to sort of think, to make you think, well, maybe I'm not seeing something here, so you might try and guess outside of that box. And so he said usually you'd have 4 plurals and 6 singulars, and so you would go through and make your mind up that way. But he said it was just quite deceptive how it was done. So anyway, that's an interesting video worth watching.
Massive help from Caleb Richardson, who's here tonight. All 100 of those King James only pastors went through live phone surveys in which we carefully tabulated their responses. Out of 100 King James only pastors on my false friends quiz, 20 of them, 1 got all 20 questions right.
I'm pretty sure, no, that wasn't. It was Bible Protector was saying he did the quiz on his website and he got them all right. And so, which you would expect from Matthew for sure. He's like, if you want to meet someone who knows all those issues about Blaney edition, 1611 and all that, he's quite an interesting guy to talk to.
Turns out he had read my book. But as a group, they did very poorly. On the false friends that I gave both to you and to them, they scored an average of 11.5% correct on those 5 false friends that I gave to you. You can see the detailed results of this at KJB Study Project.
Okay, so I'm going to ring up critical text pastors around my area. And so the thing is too, I'm going to ring up people who, if I jump on their website and they're using a modern version, say ESV or an NIV, well, they're all in the same group. You know what I mean? Who's to say, like, so many people use the King James and it's like, well, we're all this cohesive sort of group. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't care if he's interviewed 100 pastors. I don't know who they are. Are they oneness guys? Are they, a lot of, T.D. Jakes type of people use the King James. Mormons use the King James. It's like, who's he interviewed? But, let's say he has made sure that they're evangelical people. I don't know them. And even if all of them got everything wrong, it doesn't make, just because you surveyed a group of people, it doesn't make, those poll questions unbiased. And that's the claims that are coming out. People who've been called up, they're saying it's a huge bias to trick you into saying things. And the guy said he felt really manipulated in that.
Project.com. Dead words and false friends cause a sufficient number of problems for readability that I believe King James readers should, at the very least, be adding modern English translations to their Bible study. If the text is the issue for you,
so we should be getting the Logos Bible software and reading an ESV and reading an NASB and the Reader's Edition or whatever by Jennifer Knust, and we should be going through all that, And the thing is, it can cause absolute confusion. I mean, just try reading 1 Samuel chapter 13, verse 1. You go through it in all the Bibles. You'll just be left there going, I have no idea. And Mark just goes, well, God's put us in this situation. We have no idea what it really says. It's like, no, we do. Just read the King James. Just get rid of all this other rubbish and stuff that's done by people who can't really read the languages properly. Let's just stick with people who we know, the tried, true real translators, King James translators, let's just stick with what they've done, not just, some guy just fudging along with the dictionary,
The New King James and the modern English version are both based on the Textus Receptus in the New Testament. You can have your TR and read it too. Do not throw away your King James. I have not done that.
So he's saying the MEV and the New King James. And so in my last video, I showed you quite a lot of examples. So I might just quickly just grab that. NKJV. Let's just pull up my page here. And we just look at some examples. Yeah, and not increase the joy in Isaiah 9:3 is and increased its joy in the New King James. So one saying not, one saying it has. And so it's the exact opposite. The New King James removes the word not, which makes the text say the exact opposite to the King James. Okay, so Psalm 7:11. God judgeth the righteous. And it has here, God is a just judge. No, he judges the righteous, not he's a just judge. And so, there's quite a lot of problems with the King James, New King James. When you put them side by side, there's quite a lot of problems that are evident in the New King James, is what I'm trying to say. Even the whole concept of hell into Hades, I understand the whole concept of, Hades will get thrown into Gehenna, but they are both warranted to be translated as hell the vast majority of the time. Hades just sort of doesn't do it for people. You have to be really churched to understand Hades, Yeah, so if you want to look at that, I'll throw that into the mix. People can scour through that article. It's not exhaustive. It's interesting here. It says peddling the word of God, which just means to sell the word of God, which is what Mark's been doing for the last 10 years. He's been selling Logos Bible software. He's been, working for Faith Life, for Logos, and now for Crossway. That's the whole peddling the word of God. We're clearly in the King James, we're not as many which corrupt the word of God. It's a whole different concept. Even most modern Bibles talk about peddling the word of God. It's like, well, isn't that what you're doing? But it's not even wrong. And that's the thing. A lot of these modern Bibles create sin where there's not. They create division where there's no division. They say, instead of reject a heretic, it's reject a divisive man. It's like, well, okay, what defines you as divisive? If you just speak against the pastor, or you just have a question, oh, you're divisive, you're out, because the Bible says you've got to reject you. And I've seen churches use those type of verses to justify the silly things that go on sometimes. Anyway, so you guys can read through that in your own time. Let's continue.
But I do believe that because of these false friends and other reading difficulties, because of language change, the King James should be revised or replaced in institutional settings like this pulpit, like scripture memory curriculums, like Bible colleges, like revivals, even the signage out in front of your church. By all means, read the King James Version. I still do. I'm going through it yet again this year. But do not insist that other believers read the King James and only the King James. It is no longer sufficiently intelligible to serve as your exclusive means of access to God's holy word. God's word is too important. I don't want to miss a single syllable if I can help it. The audience for scripture is not only believers. Let's look again at 1 Corinthians 14, if you possibly still have that open. Let's just look real quick at verses 24 and 25 in that passage, 1 Corinthians 14. If all prophesy, which in this passage, as you may recall, is Paul's way of talking about using words we can all understand in the language that we all speak. If all prophesy, and there come in one that believeth not, does that ever happen in this church? I'm sure it does. or one unlearned. He is convinced of all, which, by the way, is a convicted to say. And we wouldn't say convinced or convicted of all, we'd say convicted by all, okay? He is judged of all or by all, and thus are the secrets of his heart made manifest, and so falling down on his face, he will worship God and report that God is in you of a truth. You might be skeptical of my use of 1 Corinthians 14. I would have been too when I was a convinced King James onlyist as a teenager and young college student. But I am by no means the first to see applications outside of tongues from this chapter, 1 Corinthians 14. Back in a day, long ago, when Roman Catholics were still reluctant to translate the Bible at all, there was a group of Protestants who argued against the Catholic view, insisting that translation of the Bible is necessary. These Protestant biblical scholars wrote a stalwart defense of the need for translation into the language of the common man, William Tyndale's Plowboy. And here's the first argument.
So the whole concept of the plowboy, and I think Dan did a good job at talking about, who is the plowboy. That plowboys were mostly illiterate. They weren't going to school. They were it was like child labor in those days. And he's a young boy. He's working. He's just on the farm, and that's probably going to be his lot in life. And that would have been the vast majority of people in Europe in those days. And so the whole concept of the plowboy, it comes from Erasmus. Tyndale used that as well. But it's basically, it's not saying you dumb the Bible down to that level, because, what level were they at if they can't read? But what it's saying is if it's in their own language, they will eventually, it will, come through, probably through their parents or through, tutors or through the local pastor or local church, or they're going to hear it. They're going to be able to hum some of the words to themselves, or so there is quite a whole section about the plowboy. Chris Yetzer has written about it and talked about how the concept that Mark brings across about the plowboy is, it's not just, we should dumb our Bibles down to that level. The whole concept of the plowboy was, because there are concepts that Tyndale talks about, like atonement. He actually invented words, like atonement, like Passover. And, how would you expect the plowboy to know those things? Well, they would be taught. It would just become part of the culture. And they eventually would get the word of God would be saturating the whole land. But, so anyway.
Argument they used, echoing Romans 10. How shall men meditate in that which they cannot understand? How shall they understand that which is kept close in an unknown tongue? Then they explicitly cited 1 Corinthians 14 in their defense of the need for Bible translation into the common tongue. They said, as it is written, except I know the power of the voice, I shall be to him that speaketh a barbarian, and he that speaketh shall be a barbarian to me. Do you know who wrote that? Do you know who used 1 Corinthians 14 to apply to Bible translation and not just tongues?
Yeah, to Bible translation, like defending the right to translate into English, not just a few difficult words here and there that have gone obsolete.
It was the King James translators and their brilliant and excellent preface that I've read many times and strongly encourage you to read.
You've read many times and you still don't understand it 100%. I mean, clearly, someone like Bryan Ross, Chris Yetzer, and I think even myself, we could say probably 6 or 7 things that Mark Ward constantly brings up about the preface that's just wrong. And you just sort of get tired of bringing these things up, But, and even just this, he's saying, well, they use that in the preface. It's like, yeah, it's talking about translating from one completely foreign language, or having a Bible like trapped in like Latin when you can't understand it, but having it in English, well, that's great. It's talking about something that's 100% unintelligible, not something that's 99% intelligible and it's 1%, got archaisms and a few other, dead words.
That preface opens with an extended defense of the need for Bible translation revision. I'm making the very same case that they made in their day. I strongly urge...
No, you're not. It's in their day, in all the Reformation prefaces, they were talking about a complete language, just like Paul was talking about that in the context of 1 Corinthians 14. Mark's been shown this many, many times by many, many people, but he's just basically thumping the pulpit now and saying, I'm correct, I'm correct.
Urge you to read and study that preface after studying 1 Corinthians 14. Brothers and sisters, I stand with the King James translators against King James onlyism. The King James version, despite my love for it,
why would you think that the King James translators don't think, like if you use the term King James onlyism in a sense where you only really read the King James or you only have respect for the King James version, then that's exactly what they had, because they were rejecting readings in the bishops, in the Geneva and earlier Bibles, which they saw as errors because they tidied them up. And clearly, I mean, Mark might have read the preface a zillion times, but let's look at the dedication to King James. When you look at that, it's pretty clear that they make the claim that their Bible is something that is very perfect. Listen to this. For when your highness had once out of deep judgment apprehended how convenient it was that out of the original sacred tongues, the Greek and Hebrew, together with the comparing of the labors both of our own, English, and other foreign languages, of many worthy men who went before us, there should be one more exact translation of the Holy Scriptures into English, into the English tongue. So that word exact, Bryan Ross has done quite a few videos on that word, and it's clearly a word that means perfect. Now, in the preface, they talk about what perfect means. There are two ways of looking at perfect. There is the Greek and Hebrew, which are the perfect words of God. They're what has come down through from God himself. But then there is another type of perfection, which is a perfection in translation. So these aren't equivalent, but there is a perfection that you can get in translation. And so that is what this word here, the exact, means right here. So let me just read that again. He's saying, for your highness, so that's James, had once out of deep judgment apprehended how convenient it was that out of the original sacred tongues, out of the Greek and Hebrew, together with the comparing of the labors both of our own, from Tyndale, Coverdale, Great Bible, Geneva, Bishops, all the texts that went before in English, Wycliffe, and other foreign languages. So they went through the German, the Dutch, the Spanish, the French. They went through all of the other foreign language Bibles. So this is how studious they were, the King James guys, of many worthy men who went before us. So notice they're saying there should be one more exact translation, not 15, it's one. Now, I'm sure you probably could have some words that are synonyms and it would be just as accurate, but there's really nothing like the King James, is there? It's stands alone. And it is that they're saying that there should be one. So they're saying our translation, there will be one more exact translation. And in the preface, it clearly talks about that out of many good ones, they made one principal good one. So that's like that's the best one. If you're like, okay, which one's the best one out of all them? The translators would have gone, well, the one we just worked on. They say it here, they say it in the preface. So it's like, okay, well, we call it the King James. Okay, it's like, well, the King James is the best one. And no, I'm not saying that they only read the King James. Some of them clearly in their own writings and things like that used the bishops, used the Geneva until the day they died, some of these translators. But they clearly spelt out in the preface and in the dedication to the king that there was one principle good one. There's one more perfect, exact translation of the Holy Scriptures into the English tongue. So I think that speaks volumes.
Despite the hundreds of verses and phrases that I've memorized in it, it is no longer sufficiently intelligible for contemporary English readers.
So I think I'm going to stop it there, but I'm going to go through some of these comments. I have been sort of skipping over them. I will just shut some of these pages down because it's sapping my... Oh, actually, yeah, I was going to go through some of the... let's go to Nick Sayers. Let's just type in Mark Ward. Maybe debate. Now, this is my personal Facebook, so it's probably not the best thing to just have this open like this. But here we have Robert Lee Vaughan. He's like, this question is for group members who do not use the King James Bible. In the recent Dan Haifley Mark Ward debate, Ward made the argument that the King James Bible is unintelligible or not sufficiently intelligible, so that it should be taken out of service and not kept as a Bible for general use, preaching, evangelism, Bible study. My question to you is this: what sentences, verses, or paragraphs in the King James Bible do you think are unintelligible? I would adjure only those who have been asked to answer the question to give an answer, but I know you will all do whatever you want to do, so I won't adjure you. So we got 72 comments on that. So that's on the Textus Receptus Academy. So people are chatting about this debate. It says here by Bobby Howell, after Mark Ward's recent debate over the King James Version, as well as a recent blog from an Almanus Ambassador Bible College, issues a reiteration of their position on the text issue. As Ward states in another video in response to a talk given by Alton Beale, the school will continue down the anti-academic approach and bow to ignorance. Although this is disappointing for many reasons, this is not at least surprising. So it says, for the past 35 years, ABC has been steady in its position on the Word of God, and it's got King James Version there. So, you know, if people want to continue with the King James Version for preaching, for ministry, for all that, well, you know, you're bowing to ignorance. You're just lowbrow, you know. And this is the sort of stuff that gets said all the time about our position. Mark Ward seeks one thing. He wishes to promote Mark Ward. So this is John David Howe. How does he do this? By presenting himself as the KJVO Dragon Slayer. What did this debate do? It gave him the platform he hoped for in order to be the serpent's hiss and subtly plant doubts on the authority and reliability of the words of the living God. He succeeded beyond his wildest imagination, in my impression. No Bible believer should tolerate his premise of false friends for 5 seconds. Archaic words are not false. They may need to be defined, but they are not false. If anything, Mark himself is the false witness that the book of Proverbs warns us about repeatedly. So that's a video I did a while back. So yeah, Bryan Ross has done a video, and so I encourage people to have a look at that. He talks about the preface a lot more eloquently than I'm doing. And we also see that Dwayne Green has talked about, is the KJV readable, a debate review. So he's done a video on that. So I've listened to that as well. Tommy McMurtry also did a video on it where he talks about Mark Ward and things. Oh, yeah, defending the King James Bible. I've got that one. Ian Paisley. So that looks old. And this is the quote by Scriptorium Bibles. Now, I actually copied this into an audio program and listened to it. Now, in all honesty, okay, it's like regarding last night's debate, I'm going to lay out some cold facts, okay? It's what Mark Ward wanted. He makes himself the center of attention. So I would say that is pretty much what Mark Ward wants as well. He's self-seeking, self-serving, and a total and complete narcissist who is a true sociopath, deviant in every sense of the word. Mark does not care about you or anyone else, nor the true Church of Christ. And so it's just sort of like, I understand, like sometimes I'm saying things that are like, well, I think Mark Ward is being toxic. I think Mark Ward is being narcissistic. I think Mark Ward is being, disingenuous and all the rest of it. But it does seem to just be only just that. It doesn't seem to get much into any substance. So that's where I'm just sort of like, okay, well, take that or leave it. That's his opinion. Okay. So yeah, the King James Research Council. What was interesting was Dr. Brown weighed in on this. So let's just see if I can find that. Yeah, there's the Satan's Bible. Yeah, so I was going through that a few years ago now. Okay. Maybe I should type in Brown. Actually, King James Bible Research Council. If I can find their one again, which was up here. So 20 hours ago, I've had numerous people ask me about the doctors Haifley Ward debate since I am the president of the King James Bible Research Council. I disagreed with it from the start. In my own opinion, why give the enemy a platform to advocate his errant views? While each member of the King James Bible Research Council may choose where and what way to preach and teach, as president of the King James Bible Research Council, I do not feel it was wise to endorse this debate. Some of my friends on the council disagreed. One gave the thumbs up. After the debate, I talked to the one who gave the go, and he said it was a bad idea. My personal assessment is Dr. Ward was successful in planting seeds of doubt and causing confusion. As I see it, the only high note was Dr. Haifley confronted Dr. Ward, saying it was a sin to give a young person the King James Bible. It is my belief that more harm was done than good, giving Dr. Ward a platform to spew his false teachings. While I am the president of the King James Bible Research Council, I am speaking for myself. The debate was a bad idea. The premise of the debate, without including the textual issue, was a big problem. Okay, so there's quite a lot said there. And apparently this went through a few issues. So I think it was Jonathan Greathouse. I might just open up his one. I think he actually talks about it. No, he doesn't. So I'll just shut that down. So yeah, I also watched this video by Manny Rodriguez, and he talks about it as well, saying that he wasn't really into it. But I think the thing is, obviously I'm not against updating words. And I think this is the thing. It's almost like, well, why wouldn't you be into updating words? It's just sort of like one of those concepts. It's just like a logical concept of like, okay, well, let's just update things. Let's just sort of, update some spelling or whatever. That's sort of, it's like the brakes are on that so hard that, I like sometimes I've often thought that, I've already, done the New Testament in the KJV 2023, but I've often thought if you just went through and just say there was like 30 people who were, key, TR, KJV people, and you just went through and said, okay, let's look at the word show and shoe. You know, got SHEW and SHOW. Is everyone cool if that gets updated? And then just start going through each word, and just to the point where it's like it's updated. Now, some of these Bibles, like the KJV 21, I think it is, I might be wrong there, they still use thee and thou and that type of language. There are some mild updates, which I but they still haven't been accepted. I think because people probably really want a huge committee to do an update of the Bible. But anyway, like I think the actual concept of fighting against an update, like the question that was brought up before about, what about in the Trinitarian Bible Society when you're doing a Bible into the Persian language? It's not just, we're getting an old Persian Bible that's like 200 years old and reprinting it. They're doing an update, like it's the latest language. But they are bound by the Constitution not to do that. They just have to print the authorized version. So I can understand why they're only doing that. But it's like, I think it is a hard thing to fight against. It's a hard thing to fight against just going, well, this is an old word. Why don't we just spell it this way? And I think that's a losing battle, really. I mean, obviously, I've worked on the edition that I've done. I've worked these issues out, years and years ago, because I've been working on it for years. I'm always challenged about it. But I just sort of come down to, well, and that's why I say I think what Mark Ward's saying is just sort of stating the obvious half the time. It's like, well, we've got an old word here. Why can't it just be updated? I think there are trust issues there. People just don't trust people to do that. And the thing is, someone like Mark Ward, he's coming along saying all this, but he's pushing you towards a critical text. And it's like, so who's going to trust him, But I think just coming back to, like, say, the King James Bible Research Council, why, like, even someone like Stephen Anderson, obviously his whole thing's just gone down a cliff. But, he, in his James White chat, he said he wasn't against updating words. I know a lot of, I think even Dan Haifley, the guy who's debating Mark Ward here, apparently Chris Yetzer said that he had said that an update would be fine. So I think in principle, we're like, that's sort of what should happen. But it's like, it's just trust levels, really. But the thing is, we trust, in overseas, like, if it's in Arabic or it's in Urdu or it's in, Papua New Guinea and hills somewhere, they can have an update of their Bible and readable and all that. But for us, it's like, no, we've still got to stay with that. And, I don't think the King James has really been updated, like revised. When I say updated, I'm usually like, just spelling and, a few times, just a few spelling things here and there have made a distinction in certain words. I think it was Bryan Ross was bringing that out with the word naught with the A in it and naught with the OU in it, or they mean different things. One is sort of like a value issue. It's naught, says the buyer. The other one is like naughty, it's a bad thing, so and just 1611, they were both spelt the same, but then they were just brought out. That they just worked on those type of things. I mean, it would take a huge project to go through. One of the things that I've always thought was that the one that I've worked on could be used as a draft. One thing I want to point out too, so I might just shut my Facebook down. Okay, there's the étude word that appears in the 1535 French Bible that just means study. So that's quite interesting. It only means study. It doesn't mean be diligent. It means in your mind, you're thinking it's an academic pursuit. What was I going to look at? Yeah, if you type in KJV 2023, this website comes up. I was looking the other day. Where are we? Here, KJV2023.com. This is not me. So this guy contacted me a few years ago. He's saying the KJV update project is still ongoing now in 2024. So they haven't done their work yet. Okay. We have a publishing contract for the project, so they're doing this thing. They've got the KJV 2023. I mean, that's what I've done. And anyway, so I was looking at this going, and this guy contacted me and said, look, how about you just give me all of the files for the work that I've done, and he can work on it as a base. And I'm like, but I don't know you. And I said, can I see some of your translation work? And he eventually sort of gave me a little bit of, threw me a bone and gave me some of the translation work, and was filled with errors. And I was like, I don't trust this guy. Who's this guy? And so he's got the Holy Scriptures Bible Society, the KJV update.com. He's even gone and got KJV 2024. So mine's a 2023. He's got the 2023 website, and he's got KJV 2024. It's like, you're just copying off me, dude. This is just not right. So anyway, I thought I'd point this out because people would think that this is me. And so I often get this type of thing. And yeah, he's got a GoFundMe thing so you can see who it is. Someone's given like $50. You got 2 people involved. Thanks for your support. Okay, so he's raised like nearly $300, and he wants like $900,000 to do this. How many people are giving to this thinking that it's me? I don't know. I think it's if you know who this guy is, it'd be interesting. Like, he has contacted me. I could just contact him, and it's just wrong, So anyway, I just thought I'd bring this up because they do have a bunch of websites. Project websites. Here we go. So modern King James Version, but there is a modern King James Version. It's the J. Green's MKJV. If you go to MKJV Bible, it'll take you to the MKJV website, which I hope is still up there. Maybe I can get there through my one. J. Green. MKJV online. Okay, MKJV. And you can read it there, and it's like, well, there's one called the MKJV, dude. There's one called the 2023. How can you call? I've called mine the KJV 2016 edition, the KJV 2023 edition, and you're just like, oh, I'll call mine the KJV 2024. Don't do this. Modern King James Version. I'm sure that they won't be happy about that. Just stop borrowing everyone else's ideas. You think for yourself. So anyway, that's not me. I'm not that dude. And so anyway, so where are we with these comments? Okay, so my gosh. There are so many comments. I think there's more comments than I've actually gone through so far. Alan Stewart, yes, the pronoun is also embedded in the verb pray. The pronoun is doubled up for emphasis. You don't have that emphasis in the King James Version. I make typos all the time. I've stopped caring. Alan Stewart, the same things happens with Jesus's I am statements. There is emphasis on I in Greek that's explicit. You don't get this in the King James Version. Again, it's not that the King James Version is wrong. It's a limitation of English. Shall Stand Forever says, but I do think Taylor de Soto has made valid points that academic types take the high ground of original languages, but aren't proficient in those languages near like they claim. Yeah, and it is a point where, you know, when I show like the work of Georgios Babiniotis and people just reject it outright, it's like, well, you know, how much of an expert in Greek does someone have to be? Do they have to be, you know, in the academy for us to trust them? I think people in the academy are actually poisoned against true definitions. Alan Stewart says that Dwayne Green, pray therefore sounds like it has emphasis and importance. Your example is a little on the subjective side, an appeal to a false sense of authority. Alan Stewart, it's not subjective. It's explicit in Greek. It's not in English. Alan Stewart, why do you have to say it sounds like, but in the TR Greek, I can say it is? GD says that's a lot of work to find the meaning of a word. Why not change it? Yeah, well, yeah, I'm not sure where we're up to in the comment section here with our video, but let's just continue. Dwayne, based on the difference of the given example you've made, what are we lacking in the communication in that passage? A. Hannah says, and what does that get you, Dwayne Green? How much more spiritual heightened does it get you, noticing the extra emphasis? You can still engage it wrong, I suppose. So everyone's drilling Dwayne at the moment. Hey, Hannah, that's not the question. You're essentially saying the same thing here as when a critical text advocate says when they suggest no cardinal doctrines are affected. And so I'm not sure if I really want to just keep going over that. So I might just keep going through. Nick, would he ever put those translations to an app? Maybe you're talking about my translations. Yes, I have wanted to put things on an app. I just don't have the time. I really need to do that. I'm just about to release the Proverbs into the public domain so people can look at it, think about it, and then I'll work on putting that at the end of this edition, and then Psalms. I'm going to do the same. So then this will have New Testament, Proverbs, and Psalms, and then I'm just going to continuously work on the Old Testament. I've done quite a bit of it, but I will have time to do that in the next few months, and so that's the plan. Okay, I want that Matthew's Bible in new version. Okay, so maybe you're talking about some of the older Bibles. Okay. Helg says, it's hard to tell if Mark Ward thinks the King James Version translators really were talking about intelligibility in the same language, or if he understands they were talking about intelligibility in one language to another. If you read Mark Ward's work, he gives in one hand and he takes away with the other. In other words, give him enough time, he'll contradict his own claims. It does seem like that. He will say, I never talk about the text, but then he talks about the text. I only want to, promote, I don't want to get you onto any other Bible but a TR Bible, but then he'll try and get you off to some other Bible. Dwayne Green. Okay, so Dwayne and these other guys are all chatting and talking about the Greek language and some emphasis on ego, emi, and a few other words. So GD says, why does someone have to go to all these searches to find the meaning of obscure words that can easily be changed? Okay, so it must be way back when I was sort of looking up chambering and wantonness. or rather translated into modern readings. Well, the main thing is they get it wrong. If you just go to the New King James in Numbers there, it says Wahab in Super. What's that? It's not what it's not an update of the King James. It's a completely different thing. And that's just one example. There are hundreds and hundreds. There's about 500 examples that I could give in the New Testament, but there are thousands of examples just in the New King James alone, where you go there and it's not clearly representing what the King James has. It's not just an update of the King James, and so you can't just go, well, let's just go somewhere where it's all done for you. It's like it's not done for you. If you actually care about what the words say, you look at these parallel and side by side. Not many people have done that. I've done that with the edition that I've done here in my hand. But like when it comes to the Old Testament, going through and checking in Psalms, and yes, I've gone through and looked at the MEV in a lot of the Psalms, and because I'm checking to see if it's got readings that are very good updates of the King James and close to the King James. Sometimes they just omit half a verse here and there. It's like, what are they doing? And it just seems like a rehash of the New King James, but every now and then they just throw a boomerang at your head, and you're like, what was that? Why haven't they got the rest of the verse there? Why is that word changed to something that matches the New American Standard Bible but no other one? And it's bizarre. And so you can't just go somewhere and go, oh, well, it's all readable. We're interested in accuracy. Okay, so I'll just sort of skip over the Dwayne Green issues here at the moment. Helg says, or whether or not he's just using their statements in his own way, but it sounds like he believes they were talking about intelligibility in the same language. Yeah, that's what he thinks, or I think he's been shown that that's not the case, but he already made that claim and ran with it for a long time. Then people pulled him up on it, but he's like, well, let's not get these pesky facts. Let's not allow these pesky facts to get in the way of a good story. And so he's just running with his story. So GD, learning words isn't an archaic practice. Learning is part of life. JD, so you have to carry around a 700 word list inside your Bible to understand words that could be easily changed to a modern reading. Well, that's what I've done. And so I've only done the New Testament so far. But, so I've got no problem with that. But up until I have done that, I did have the 700 word meaning thing in my Bible. But you could easily make, say, like a 300 word list for the New King James. Wahab in super. You could. What's that mean? Why does it have that? There are many words. Most assuredly. Who's saying that? It's like, what does that mean? It means like really. Someone has to explain it to you. When I was first a Christian, I'm like, most assuredly. Like it's like a sure thing. It's like, okay, because it's not how people use the language, So, maybe you could use a New King James word list. Okay, so everyone's still drilling Dwayne on the ye thing in the Lord's Prayer. GD, I speak 2 other languages besides English. The King James Version equivalent printed by the Trinitarian Bible Society were last revised in 1960 and 2011 respectively, and are perfectly understandable. Why not the same with the King James Version? Okay, so and that's a good question, and that's something that I asked the Trinitarian Bible Society, but they're obligated under their constitution to only print the authorized version. And so that will never change. And so they will be known for doing good Bibles in all the other languages, but when it comes to the King James, they will stick with printing what we already have today. They're not going to change. They're not going to move from that. That they are restricted by their own constitution in that. JD, have you ever read a book or paper on history or a subject where you had to look up a word the book or paper uses? Was the book or paper worthless because you had to do that? It needs updating. Or did you need updating? Why is updating acceptable for any other language by the TBS but not the English? Yeah, and I've thought that's a pretty good comment to make. And I've asked that over the years, especially being involved with Bible translation work. And so that's one of the things. A lot of people are just updating the King James. And so having those words already updated into words that they can just look up in a modern dictionary, that way they can go, oh, that's what it means in the Cambodian language or in the Urdu language. They're things that I've worked on. Okay. So I'm just sort of skipping over some of this. Okay. Maybe I can show you what I'm actually looking at. So this is StreamYard. It's so good. You've got all these different views and stuff like that. So this is what I'm looking at when I'm going through the comments. Okay. 700 word list. Okay. So I think at the end of the day, everyone's having a really good chat. And for me to just go through and read absolutely everything, I don't think I'm going to get that much out of. I will get a lot out of the chat. I really do enjoy doing that, but it's gonna take me like an hour and a half. And by the time I finish it, there's going to be another 60 comments. And so I'm just going to have to draw the line somewhere. But I really appreciate you guys jumping on and chatting. It's just one of those things where the chat is just so big that okay, kept pure in all ages, says the guy contacted me as well. I didn't like the samples that he gave me at all. That's very interesting. Go and eat my dinner. Yeah, so anyway, everyone's had a really good chat. Nick surfing the MEV, the bandwidth fell off. I mustn't have noticed that. So anyway, I think I'm going to bail, guys. God bless you. So what is coming up? So we have Nehemiah Gordon. Now, I know I've announced this like 7,000 times. That's a bit of an exaggeration, but he contacted me and said, when do you want to do this? I'm over the COVID thing. I said, well, let's do it I think it's this Friday, my time on Friday in the morning. So it's going to be like 6 in the morning or something. So that means it's Thursday about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, New York time. So that's going to be great. And so, yeah, obviously Nehemiah is not a Christian, but he knows the Hebrew language well, and he's become involved with text criticism, but he has a lot to say about Jehovah. And so that's one of the conclusions that I've come to with my Revelation 16:5 studies. So I might pull that down actually. Yeah, you can just look at that funny little thing and submit your debate questions there. We'll put marks in the screen. Oh, here we go.
Can I agree?
We'll just put Dan back up there. So we've got that coming up. I'm going to do a Byzantine school video. And there's a really important topic that I want to talk about with that I think will forever change your view on Aldous, Erasmus, and the access to manuscripts that they have. Now, I know as I've been going through this, it's like Bessarion's library was in Venice, just down the road from Aldis's print shop. And when I was talking to Heaven Jones, it was sort of like I was asking him, like, could you see that Erasmus probably had access to all those manuscripts? And it's like, no, but it's sort of like, why not? You know what I mean? It was one of those things where I think I was just sort of buzzing, going, yeah. I think it was just a few days before I was studying Bessarion and just where all these manuscripts ended up, and it was like in Venice, you know, and it's still there. They can go through those manuscripts and just see, you know, if Erasmus was influenced by them. But so I've got another really good piece of information that I think will really it'll set a limit of what people can say about Erasmus and Aldus and the access that they had to manuscripts. We're going to be looking through that. So that's the Byzantine school stuff. I want to make a final Anderson video on the new IFB. It just has to be done. When I was in Pakistan, I just didn't make any videos, but I was constantly just in my feed getting all this Anderson stuff. And I'm like, okay, that's going bad. And it's like, this is getting really bad. And then by the time I left Pakistan, it was like, this is insane. this is like a train crash, you know? So I just sort of have to clear everything up with that, sort of make a final definitive video on the whole issue and then move on. I still want to go back to the eschatology videos that we're doing, looking at Stephen Anderson videos, Patrick Boyle, guys in the new IFB. I guess it's the obsolete IFB, or the what do you call something that's redundant? You know, it's gone. The archaic IFB, it's gone. This movement's just died because it's basically Anderson is the movement. And it's died. So he would have been so much better off just coming out and saying, yeah, guys, I messed up, and just sat down for a year. And then, you know, it's like, what's he doing? He's just like, yeah, it's okay to beat your wife with a electrical cord. Everyone does it, don't they? It's like beatings will commence until morale picks up, you know, sort of thing. It's like, oh, this guy's just nuts. So yeah, I want to do a definitive video on that. Now, I've got a ton of footage from Pakistan, and so I do want to go through those. I know some of you guys, these are the least popular videos that I do, but some people are very interested in that work, and so and I do want to try and generate some interest in it, because, you know, it costs us a lot of money to do that sort of thing. And we want to do heaps more there. There's so much that we could do in Pakistan. We just had a ball, and you'll see through the video footage and photos and stuff like that, all that we've been doing. We were just like, I think it was, there would have been, out of 3 weeks, there would have only been like 5 or 6 days where we weren't doing something. It was just constant preaching, and half the time too, you have to travel somewhere. It takes an hour, and I'm not talking about, you know, nice little freeway. We're talking about some of the roughest roads in the world and some of the most dangerous driving. And so anyway, I'll go through I'll explain what it's like to go from Western country, nice lovely Australia, fresh air and sunshine, and to get on the plane and go to Pakistan, what it's like, you know. And I invite people to come if you want to come over and do some work. Like, while I was there, this white guy came to our house. It was like, who are you? He's like, well, he was like, well, I'm come here. I'm doing some missionary sort of stuff. And he was a bit standoffish. And then I got the whiff that he was a 7-day Adventist. And sure enough, it was like Sabbath and all that. And I was like, oh no. But even guys like that are over there, you know. So yeah, I invite anyone to come over. Once you see the work that we're doing, if you're interested in that, you know, feel free to jump on board with the next thing that we're doing. what else? I might actually pull my YouTube up just quickly. I'll probably only talk for about another 3 or 4 minutes. But I do want to see where I'm going with all this. Okay, my channel, history, playlists, my videos. No, it's not playing the game. It's going to YouTube Studio, which I don't need. Okay, here's my channel. Okay, so the live videos. Yeah, so I'll do another Anderson video. I want to do some more on the Potter's House. So that's interesting for people involved with that group. I think it's been quite helpful for quite a lot of people, even though that's quite a small issue. Most people wouldn't be that interested in that. It was great to interview Hixson. That was the last interview that I did. Last Byzantine school was, back here. And I still want to do some videos with Matt. And what else have we got? Yeah, I finished the 1 John 5:7 ones. So I think what I'll do is I'll actually go through maybe the Peter Van Cleek TurretinFan debate, and I'll critique that. That'll be a good one to go through. And then after that I'll go through the one that I did with James Snap Jr. What else have we got here? I think that's about. Oh yeah, I've still up to part 7 on examining the King James and the controversy. I've sort of hit a bit of a period in the book where there's sort of like 30 pages of just sort of general information. So it's like, what am I going to do with this? So I got to be quiet with that. But I've got some things to say. I'll have to rev that up again. I guess the interviews are going to kick back in with Nehemiah. I might even try and get Dan Haifley on for an interview. Maybe I can even get Mark Ward on for an interview. That'll be interesting. So apart from that, I think, that's where I'm heading. So that's about it, guys. So I'll shut this down. I'll play my outro. Sorry, I'm not reading any more comments. I've just sort of... there's just way too many comments for me to go through. So I'll play my little outro and we'll see you again soon. God bless you guys.